everyone to the regular meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission for the City of Ojai, Thursday, April 14th, 2016. I'd like to lead us in the, should I lead in the roll call, or do you want to do that, Kathleen? We always forget it, we have to do it.
Yes, I'm sorry. Okay, point of order, Steve, should we sign? I understood from that Sherry did these backwards. Should the oath of office be now? Can I ask the chair to move it forward?
I think you can go ahead and do roll call and then proceed to the
that's
oath.
fine. Okay, Commissioner James. Here. Commissioner Hill.
Here.
Commissioner Akins.
Here.
Commissioner Convery.
Here.
Hey. Commissioner Quinn.
Here.
And Commissioner Vogue. Is that right? Did I say right?
Yes.
And Chair McCready.
Here, thank you.
Note that everyone is here and present.
Thank you very much. I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll swear in our new members. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. McClary? Thank you.
Chair McCready, thank you. I am here tonight as the Deputy City Clerk to administer the oath of office to your new and returning members. So if I could please have Commissioners Convery, Quinn, James, Akins, and Vogt step forward, and I will administer your oath of office. We can do this as a group. I'm sure I haven't had a chance to meet you all, so pleasure to meet you, sir.
Indeed.
Pleasure. If I could get you to please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, your name, do solemnly affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
And the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California,
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California.
that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
That I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
That I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. McClary.
Mr. Chair, if I could have a moment at the beginning of the meeting. I'm also
Mayor
here
Platts?
as the liaison for later on as well. Mayor Pro Tem Wyrick is the liaison this quarter to the HPC, but I wanted to be here to welcome everybody that was just sworn in, and so I agreed to switch with him for tonight, and so I'm here. What? A bunch of new faces. Hey, Terry? Well, anyway, thank you all so much for agreeing to serve. This is a very important committee and commission in our community. One of the most important, though I have to say they're all important. So I really want to welcome you. Enjoy your time. I started off on commissions way back when on the Redevelopment Commission and then the Planning Commission, and I enjoyed every moment that I was on them, and I really felt that you had some impact on things that happened in the city. And the most important thing is the council certainly can't do all the work of the city. We rely so heavily on the commission. So I wanted to welcome you and congratulate you and thank you very much. And I look forward to having you on our commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Blatz. We have no public comment cards in tonight, so I won't read the requirements for those. I'll invite museum. Well, first of all, I also want to welcome our new commissioners, Commissioner Vogue, Commissioner Quinn, Commissioner Convery, and Commissioner James. Happy to have you here. We're very proud to have you here. I'd like to invite museum liaison Mark Lewis to report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair McCready. I'm Mark Lewis. I'm on the museum board, and we are about to open our new exhibits, the annual Ojai Studio Arts exhibit. It will open on this Saturday, the 16th, and there'll be a public reception from 5 to 7. The artists, most of them will be there. We encourage anyone listening within the sound of my voice and in this room to attend, and hope to see you there, and to check out the exhibit. It'll be there for about 3 months. Every Saturday, starting a week from this Saturday, the 23rd, in the mornings from 11 to noon, there'll be artist talks, where 3 members of OSA will talk about their art and their creative process, running through the whole period that the show is up. So we encourage you to attend that as well, or drop in and see what they're up to artistically. On the 24th of April, our next town talk is entitled, I just happen to have the title here, Asphaltum, Chumash Superglue. And this is a local archaeologist, John Foster, and Julie Tumamate Sensley, the Chumash elder, will talk about how the Chumash used asphalt in various ways. This is naturally occurring object substance, and they used it in very many ways, which you'll be delighted to hear about if you come to the museum on the 24th from 4:30 to 6. That's a week from Sunday. Lastly, on the 15th, we will be doing a town talk hosted by myself. It'll be a one-on-one conversation with Mark Frost, who is the co-creator of Twin Peaks, and with David Lynch. He lives in Ojai, and he and Lynch are bringing it back on Showtime in a year, and he will talk about, among other things, his role in Twin Peaks, and he's also written for Hill Street Blues and an enormous number of movies and books, and he's a real interesting guy, and we encourage you to come by and check it out. That's May 15th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. No consent items at this time, no public hearing items at this time. Our first discussion item is the election of our new chair and vice chair for the calendar year, is it, I believe? Normally we would do this in January, but because we lacked a quorum until now, we will do that this evening. And so I will entertain motions for chair first and second vice chair.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
I thought we realigned that to where it was essentially June or July. It was from when the commissioners came in to when they, for their periods. Did we make that change? It used to be kind of halfway through the...
I'll confess that I'm not exactly sure what the history of the chair selection was, but at this point, with the new majority, the commission could choose to select a chair tonight to last for 1 year from tonight would be an option, rather than just for the rest of 2016.
So I believe that what we did was we extended it down to where we had new commissioners. That's what, and Chair McCready and I spoke when we were doing the agenda, and we concurred that we'd put this back on, and we validate this chair and vice chair to then roll around to May when the terms are to be coterminous with the terms,
Very
just
well.
to make ease of application.
Very well. With that, I'll entertain motions.
What?
Commissioner Hill.
Yes, I would like to nominate for the office of Chair, Brian Akins.
Brian Akins would like to nominate Darwin McCready.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that.
Do we have a second for either one of those nominations?
Second? Yeah, second.
For which?
For which?
For Darwin as chair?
You want to enter a second?
Yes, I enter a second.
So it
for
has been
Darwin.
moved
Mr.
and
Chair
seconded.
McCready.
So do we vote on this?
Yes, would you like me to do a roll call?
Yes, please.
Commissioner James? So the motion on the floor is to have Darwin McCready as chair,
And the prior motion died for lack of a second.
correct?
Yes.
Okay, Commissioner Hill?
Yes.
Commissioner Akins?
Yes.
Commissioner Convery?
Yes.
And Commissioner Quinn?
Yes.
Commissioner Vogt?
Yes.
So that motion passes.
Thank you very much. I'll do my best to serve you again this year. I'll entertain motions for vice chair at this time. Commissioner Hill.
I would like to nominate Brian Akins for the position of vice chair.
You didn't mean this, Mayor.
I second the motion.
Commissioner Vogt seconds.
No, I meant the next one. So I need to be 13. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry.
We have a move and a second for Commissioner Akins to serve as vice chair.
Vice chair, okay. So Commissioner James?
Yes.
Commissioner Hill?
Yes.
Commissioner Convery?
Yes.
Commissioner Akins? Oh, wonderful. Commissioner Quinn?
Yes.
And Commissioner Vogt?
Yes.
And Chair McCready?
Yes.
I'd just like to, point of order, since it said for a 12-month period and we're in April, we mean to, I guess, would that be 12 months or 13 months? I just want to make sure we're doing this correctly.
Why don't we say to May 31st, 2017? Make it-
Right.
Which would be 13 months.
It would be to the first meeting held in May 2017, just to be very clear.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item number 2, trash and recycle cans, picnic tables, and benches project. I think with us tonight, we have, please introduce yourself.
Yes, good evening, Chair and Commissioners. Greg Grant with the Public Works Department. And I know it's unusual for me to show up at HPC, but glad to be here. I think primarily it's an outreach. Back last summer, we started a request for a proposal process to upgrade all of the aged and decrepit trash and recycle cans throughout the city, as well as purchase and get a standard going for some picnic tables and some benches. So the area that this is already, the request for proposals has been out. We've received the proposals, and they've been reviewed thoroughly, primarily by the Parks and Recreation Commission, because that's their primary jurisdiction. You can think of Libby Park and Sarzati Park is where most of these will go. And then they've also been to the Planning Commission, and they've also, let me think about it, I think it's been at the City Council as well. And we were a little concerned that there may not be a quorum for the HPC, so we didn't, we were trying to get it to HPC before we went to them, a couple months ago. And so we went ahead, but I said we'd make sure we brought it through the HPC. There's the primary jurisdiction you would have oversight on would be the arcade area. So I believe we have 4 sets in the arcade. It might be 5 sets, but it's the covered arcade area. So from Bonnie Lou's all the way down to the corner at the pharmacy. So I was hoping just to, there is, the primary funding for this is an AB 939. It's related to recycling. It's supposed to, AB 939 is a law that promoted recycling. So we're supposed to promote recycling through the use of recycled products and so on. So part of the RFP was to try to get plastic products. But we're really reached high and low, looking for a lot of different things, covered bonnets and a nice standard look, a really attractive look. And I think you'll be pleased with what we had here, I hope. And so this kind of shows this one, it was the top pick by everyone involved was a manufacturer, a custom manufacturer, does high-end kind of work, and he really was interested in Ojai and developed even a bit of a custom craftsman style for us. So that's the can there on the right. He actually did a prototype and brought it in for us, which is pretty nice. And so we did a few pictures, putting it around town. So you can see it there. We're not actually, this is a little bit off because we're not really putting a can there. They just had it handy when they pulled it out of the truck, so we're not planting one there. So that's not the intention. But it, I guess they just put this picture in. Same thing with this one. Really, the intention is to put these cans everywhere we have existing cans. We're not putting more cans out or changing locations. But there's a good example of what is existing in the park, and they're much older and purchased under the same program about 20 years ago. And here's the new one next to it. So they'd be side by side. There'd actually be one labeled landfill trash and one be labeled recycling.
So is the idea that, I'm assuming that's a vinyl material and that it looks like wood?
It's a high-density polyethylene product, so
Okay.
it's made from old milk bottles and so on. So it's all HDP, and the great part about that is if we get graffiti, and you might have heard a real recent push on graffiti, I don't know what is going on there, but seems to be the same people doing graffiti around the valley right now. But if we get graffiti, the great thing is this plastic won't hold it. We can pressure wash it right off. And it also, as far as grime or grit or anything, you might notice the old cans that were in the arcade area, had a lot of burns and a lot of marks and so on them. So these are nice to pressure off and keep clean. And the other part is, we had a fixed bonnet. A lot of these trash cans, some people pull off the lids and they try to rifle through them for for recyclable cans and all that kind of thing. So these have fixed lids on them, and I think, hopefully you agree, they're not very attractive. I think it's really going to improve the appearance. I think we even have a shot. See, the old cans are there on the left, right? That's a pebble finish and some really old lids to them, which we couldn't find replacements for. So that is kind of the proposed replacement. And I guess we're not professional photographers, you can tell. And, but that was meant to show just a nice shot, I guess, with the bell tower in the background, and it'll be attractive appearance. So there'll really be two side by side. It'll be a trash and recycle next to each other. That maybe is a little better to show it. So I think that it's roughly every 4 or 5 of the column arches, columns for the arches is where these cans are located. That's the old ones.
Much better.
Yeah, I'm sorry?
They're much better looking. Then the old pebble ones are in every town, so these are very nice.
These are very unique, too. I mean, there was one that was kind of, and the other part is they do a nice touch, and you can see that they engrave it with the city of Ojai like that, and I think, a pretty classy approach there. And that is the actual mortise and tenon joint, the way they install those little pieces sticking out and so on there. So it's really well built, great materials, great pricing, the whole thing. It's a direct manufacturer. Everything else tends to go through resale, and they mark it up 35%. So these guys were able to beat or match all the standard pricing out there with a much nicer product than what's standardly available. So I think that was the...
How do you empty the trash can?
So these all have what's considered kind of a... it's just a pin key. It's a very rough, crude key that keeps most people out.
Oh, okay.
But it's not a fancier key that people stick a little gum or something else on that makes them inoperable. So, and we actually have spring-loaded recycling cans. We may or may not lock those cans because the recycle cans will have a plate with a hole. And sometimes people are going to get in there no matter what to get those cans out. And if we find that's the case, we don't want to have the cans vandalized just to get in. We might have a spring-loaded, we'll have the spring-loaded door and we can leave it unlocked. If people want to get the recyclables out, okay, fine. We want to promote recycling.
Where are they made? Where are they manufactured?
These are made down by a custom company down in Temecula. So it is in California, and it's all recycled products. And they tend to make them more for resorts and all that kind of thing is what they, in fact, since they've made this model, the manufacturer was just here today, the fellow who owns the company, and he's just super service-oriented. I mean, making this prototype for us and bringing it here. It's actually, that picture is outside right now. I thought if somebody got really interested, we'd bring it in, but I didn't think it would be necessary. But it's there in case, and he's sold this type. He just came back from a couple islands in Hawaii where these resorts are buying this type right now that he made for us. So interesting. So that's the presentation. Be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any commissioner comments or questions? Thank you, Mr. Grant.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I
Oh,
have a
I'm
comment.
sorry.
I was just pushing my button there.
Oh,
Wait a second.
Commissioner Vogt?
Yes, I think it's a terrific idea, but I got problems. They're associated with the jurisdiction of the commission. If I look at the historic landmarks, the arcade is listed, and the civic courts at Libby Park are listed. Otherwise, the administrative report talked about Sarasota Park and other things, which I think are beyond the point for us. Okay, then I look at what our authorization is, and it's somewhat limited. To the degree that these are historic landmarks, a permit is required and a public hearing, because it appears to me that it's a change. And I've heard in the past, our chair said everybody ought to be treated the same. And I'm perfectly willing to treat the city itself as well as everybody else. I don't think we should act outside our jurisdiction. I think it might give rise to problems in the future. So I think that the city ought to come back with a permit. Now, I may be wrong, and I'd be pleased to hear what the city attorney has to say on the subject, as long as he's here.
Could I ask a question before you answer this, Matt?
Commissioner
Does this-
Convery?
Oh, excuse me, Darwin. May I speak?
Do you have your mic on?
Does the city have to issue the city a permit? Is that what you're
Crazy, but
asking?
that's the way the
That's what the
ordinance is-
code reads?
Yeah.
The other question I had, and I had this discussion today at lunch, I think in at least 60 times, the word discretion is used in the Ojai Municipal Code. And we are allowed to use discretion, which has not been used lately, and I had a big problem with that myself, so I know about it. So I think we should put our best foot forward and set an example by starting to use discretion so that it comes back into use in the city of Ojai. That's my comment.
May I respond?
Commissioner Vogt?
I think discretion is appropriate in given circumstances where the ordinance allows the exercise of that discretion. I don't find that authorization use discretion in Chapter 8 of the Municipal Code.
Well, it's all
Mr. Summers?
Speaking first to the question from Commissioner Vogt, the requirement for a permit, a work permit specifically for work affecting a landmark is in section 4815. It's limited to the following actions affecting a landmark: construction, reconstruction, alteration, restoration, rehabilitation, relocation, or demolition. Removal and replacement of trash cans on city-owned property does not fit any of those, does not rise to that level.
Are there existing trash cans?
Yes.
I think we showed the pictures of them. They're old style, right? Yeah.
It's not affecting it's not affecting the landmark itself. The landmark is the building. The landmark is not the sidewalks below the arcade and the other city-owned sidewalks
Isn't
in that
a function
area.
of what the designation of the historic landmark says?
And as I recall,
In fact, Arcade by itself isn't a building, but it has been designated as a historic landmark.
and that designation does not extend to the trash cans below it. Such that my advice to the commission, you're always welcome to, as any advice you get, whether from me or from staff, you're always welcome to make a different opinion. But my advice is that the installation of trash cans on the arcade and at Libby Park does not require a work permit for that reason. And
It's not attached to the structure.
no, they're not attached to the structure. There's no connection between the structure, the arcade, or the wall in front of Libby Park or the post office walls. There's no connection to the structure. They're independent.
In your view, historic landmarks are only the structure on the property and not the property itself?
It depends on how the landmark was called out. Many of our landmark designations are not sufficiently specific to answer that question directly, which is in part why you'll recall the most recent landmark that was approved, Ms. Commissioner Quinn's landmark, was the designation was made specific to call out, in her case, the courtyard and the building and a few other structural elements in particular.
Okay,
It's ruled by how the landmark is described.
So I understand it's to be determined by looking at the particular designation. In other words, looking at the landmark designation in question. So first, before we can come to the conclusion you're asserting, we have to look at the landmark designations to see whether it is only the structure or the property. It may well be the property.
If the commission would,
Yeah.
if the commission would wish to review the landmark, the item could be continued, and the full documentation can be made available to you.
This item is before us only for review, right? We're not taking any action on it, correct?
Because it is staff's opinion that a permit is not required, no application has been made, and therefore the item is before you as a review and informational item, not as an action item. But you could certainly request that it be brought back as such. I would query whether, you might query with Mr. Grant where his timeline is on the project, and you might assess the opinion of the rest of the commission. I'm hearing a firm call from one commissioner. I'm not hearing that same call from the others.
Commissioner Hill?
Yes. I would like to have this clarified. We're talking about the connection between the trash can and the arcade. What about the connection in an aesthetic sense? Can we deal with it that way? In other words, it has to have a look that would be in keeping with the arcade, with the landmark.
That is to be assessed. Again, it goes back to whether or not the work itself requires a work permit. Certainly and the reason that staff put this item on your agenda and we're having this discussion is to ensure that the commission's general sense is that the look of these trash cans is consistent with the aesthetics of the arcade, which is independent of whether or not a work permit is required. It's my assessment that a work permit is not required, as noted, because this is not alteration or construction or reconstruction or restoration of the landmark itself, meaning the building.
Well, let me say this. If it's informational only, we have nothing to vote on, and so I have no quarrel. We've got the information. Whether or not you're going to come to the conclusion, after reading the designations, that a permit is required is up to you. And if we reach a contrary conclusion, or somebody reaches a contrary conclusion, we can holler.
Certainly.
Okay. I think that item it's clear that it's informational, so.
So, Chair, can I just ask Mr. Grant?
Director Walt?
So, Greg, I understand you're going to be ordering the trash cans. When will they be placed on the arcade?
It'll take roughly 3 months. There was a thought that by the manufacturer that a good deadline would be July 4th, when the parade occurs, to try to get them installed before then. He thought he might be able to make that deadline, so that was a goal. It's pretty tight. We might be able to do it.
Okay.
And so the other part, I guess, just to clarify, that's why I brought it in here. If there's a real concern for aesthetics, I guess in general, we didn't feel it was altering the structure in any way. And we had these, which I don't think there's any historical value to the existing trash cans. I would agree on that. And in the aesthetics, we thought it worked very well with the appearance, but that was to check in with you. If you were all very opposed to the aesthetics and the appearance, it would be difficult, but we could, this is a pretty mild color. It might stand out a little bit there, but it's a pretty mild color. I think you'd see. In fact, I'll be glad to pull it in. It's right outside the door.
Has planning reviewed these?
Yes.
Okay.
Planning, Parks and Recs Commission, and
okay.
Greg, why don't you go ahead and bring it in if that's not a problem?
Sure, I'll do that. So that's the goal. If everybody's very opposed to it, we'll I guess we would, enter into a realm where we'd bring in all kinds of photographs of other options and so on to see if you found. But really, we did look through, and I think we've all seen them around different towns. They're very standardized catalogs. This is a custom, very nice appearance. Excuse me, I'll step out and grab it.
Thank you.
So, Chair, I think
Director
that
Wald?
there's no problem with staff providing the information on exactly, provided it's in, there's some substantial information available about what's landmarked on the arcade. I know we've just recently reviewed that for signs. We can bring that as the informational item back to you in the next agenda in May.
Okay. Thank you.
Like the timeline would allow us to do that.
Thank you.
I'm glad I brought the can. I didn't think we'd need it. Okay, so I think you see it's, that is the same can in the picture there, yeah. But it's kind of a milder brown, I guess I'd call it. I think they called it their mahogany. And then it's got the darker lid, and it's got you can see the engraved city of Ojai on it, and so on. So that's the can.
Might I have copies of the designations of the arcade and the tennis courts or civic courts, whatever they are?
Thank you, Mr. Grant.
Okay.
So could we just get some
Director
feedback?
Wald?
Can we just have some feedback from each, can you just pull the commissioners and make sure that is there any, I mean, I'm fine bringing back the information on the landmark, but as it does, when we ever have a discussion item, can we just give great feedback on, generally speaking, if anybody has an issue with either the placement of where the cans are or what the cans look like, because that's what he's asking for tonight.
So I'll open
Kinda-
it up to discussion from the
Yes, that would be
commissioners.
great, thank you.
Commissioner James?
Just wondered if that was the only color that you had,
They make the plastics in all kinds of colors. I think we're trying to go with a milder color that works. We're trying to standardize too, so we'd rather keep the same color and style so we have spare parts and we can easily maintain these throughout the city. But this was a mild color. I mean, they certainly have all kinds of brighter colors.
I was thinking more of something that blended in with the color of the, of the building. A little bit more.
There's some benches out there. I think they're mahogany benches, and this actually matches pretty well with that mahogany. You might recall we re-oiled them years ago, just 4 years ago. Yeah, and so
That's what I
yeah,
said.
but it actually
Those look different.
Yeah, they look different on there than this does. It's slightly different.
yeah, it's the exact same can. He made one prototype he left here with us. So, but I know it's a little bit that little flash of light on it makes it look a bit more orange or something, but
Yeah.
it's really the same can.
Full-time versus.
Yeah, this light and so on. So this really it is pretty tame in there. It looks nice, and it's
Benches there.
Oh.
Yeah.
right.
You might also opine on whether the trash cans would be placed adjacent to the poles, adjacent to the columns, or behind the columns, so that they're visible or not from the road. I don't know if that's
Do you have enough-
possible, but
The intention would be to leave them much in the same setup like that, because the space between the columns
Right.
and the plants, for instance, right there's a good case, or especially when there's a bench, there's not much room there, so we want to keep that as open as possible.
Yes.
In just general, yeah.
Any other commissioner comments or questions for Mr. Grant?
Well, I thought you were going around the.
Oh, Commissioner Hill?
Yeah, one of the things that, and I'm kind of sensitive to what Commissioner Vogt brought up in the first place. After living through last year and our commission being accused of, and I've witnessed 23 years of this, and I'm not so sure the accusations were accurate, but having been accused of ambiguities in our ordinances and sloppy reporting and so on, and that the Libby gang was ready to tear our ordinances apart. That was a very horrifying experience for a commissioner to go through, to hear that. And I like the tenor of what Commissioner Vogt was saying, that we need to be precise and accurate, and if we, in this case, we need to execute a work permit to have this in place, then it's unequivocal. And I like that. I like to be in a sure place. As far as the trash receptacle, I have no problems with that at all. I think it's kind of cute and would look nice in the downtown. But I don't want to see this issue just kind of washed over as an informational item. I think there's something deeper than that we have to solve, so that we don't come back to this same situation the next time if we want to put up, flower pots or whatever it is that we're dealing with. I think we have to be on the right page.
Could I ask in there, is there an option for a director's exemption on historical preservation work permits, or a director's issued? Is it possible with this agenda item, based on this, that we could have the commission recommend review, and if a permit's required, if we, on further review, somehow felt it was required, that we issue one with a director just to replace the cans as shown?
The current historic preservation ordinance does not provide for the equivalent director's exemption process as is seen in the design review permit ordinance. Work permits are only approvable by the Historic Preservation Commission or the City Council on Appeal at the moment.
But is that another possible motion then, is to just in general have the input on the appearance, if it's approved, if you're okay, and then staff would review and assure that a work permit does not apply, and to make sure we do the legal review for that, and proceed if it's okay, and if not, bring it back.
I think that would be an option as I think we're still in the process of getting input from the commission. I would invite the chair to continue that process.
And for myself, I think it's a big improvement over the present containers. As I said, those pebble finish containers, I've seen them everywhere for a couple decades now, and this is a big improvement. The size is a little bit on the big side, but I guess that's a function of the inner can, right? Right. So there's no decreasing the size, really. No.
You have two of these next to each other?
Oh, that's huge.
Well, if you look at those other ones, they're big too.
But we didn't have two of them next to each other.
Well, there's two right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, the standard cans we have are 30 gallons, and that's what this is also.
Is that right?
Yeah. And there's typically two, trash and recycling, but it's not very clear which is which. It'll be much clearer on the new cans, trying to promote the separation.
Commissioner Akins?
I guess the question I have, and to go to Commissioner Vogue's question, what is historically landmarked is unique to the item that's being landmarked, so there's not a one-size-fits-all. So we go back to what was originally landmarked there, and we can't assume that the sidewalk or spaces underneath were part of that landmark. I mean, we would have to go back and look, as you've suggested. I like the color, I like the size. It's a much bigger improvement than the mismatches that we have that are shown in the picture. So good point. I think we should have those, what's been landmarked we don't have available to us, and to understand that.
Now, let me respond just briefly.
Commissioner
I
Vogt?
think I share the sentiment of the committee that these cans look great. My concern is the procedure. Okay.
Understood.
If you look at the code, it says, for the purposes of this chapter, unless otherwise apparent from the context, certain phrases are defined as follows. Alteration means any act or process that changes one or more of the exterior architectural feature of a structure, including but not limited to the erection, construction, reconstruction, or removal of the structure. Now, it's a little bit ambiguous as applied to this particular set of circumstances. But I think it's for us to determine whether or not it is an alteration. Moreover, well, let me conclude on that basis. I think it's an alteration. But I know a lot better about it once I see how these particular two limited structures are concerned. And I think those two structures, what are presumably the tennis courts and the arcade itself, are the only two areas that we have any jurisdiction to act.
That's correct. Commissioner Convery?
I think it looks good. I think they're in Disneyland, in Frontierland, which is kind of Craftsman, so you're on the right track. And architectural features aren't mobile. It's a garden chair isn't an architectural feature. I wonder, was there a permit granted to put the trash cans that are there now? I don't think it's an alteration. I think it's a replacement. It's a 30-gallon can. Those are 30-gallon cans. You can generally replace something without getting a new permit to replace it, which this is a replacement. It's not an architectural feature attached to the building. As I said, they're mobile, like the plant in front of Rains, like the benches. Did you need permits for the benches? And did Alan need a permit for the plant in front of Rains? It's an interesting dilemma, but again, it's not an architectural feature at all. You could take that trash can and put it anywhere in the city, and it would be the trash can.
May I respond for a second?
Well, let's continue around.
Okay.
And we'll try to wrap up.
Commissioner Quinn?
Thank you. Well, the key word that I heard you read, Commissioner, is structure. And those trash cans are not attached to or have anything to do with the architectural features of the structure. The structure are the arches, the structure is the roofing, the things that stick out at the top there. That is the structure. These are our trash cans. And I would be willing to guess, but I don't know this, that they probably are not even the trash cans that were there when this building was landmarked. So replacing trash cans, in my opinion, does not require a permit and should just be a matter of do we like them or we don't like them. And then I'm just going to say one thing which I hesitate to say is if I was choosing the trash can over there, I would choose white.
Mm-hmm.
I would choose a lighter color.
Yeah, because that does stand out, and white would blend in so much more with the arches, in my opinion. But be that as it may, if this is the color you like, I'm okay with that.
If I can quickly interject, the intention was to try to make them easy to maintain. Usually these darker colors or don't show dirt and so on, and to make them throughout the park, even though this isn't where we're actually putting one. But to have in the parks and so on, these would look real nice. So that was the concept there, yeah. So the different color, we could do it. It just increases manufacturing cost and maintenance costs somewhat, yeah.
Commissioner Vogt?
I think Commissioner Condry's position is well taken. But the normal consequence of that is that this whole procedure has been a waste of time. It's just not in our jurisdiction on that basis. And so we shouldn't vote on it, and we shouldn't give them a carte blanche. And in the interim, I'm going to look at the designations and the ordinance with some care, and if I reach a contrary conclusion, I'll ask to be put on the agenda next time. So if we do nothing, I think that's the best course of action at this point in time.
I don't disagree with that, and I think Mr. Grant is just here as a courtesy because it is a landmark, and we review anything that goes on there, and it's just informational, and we're not required to take any action, and I'm not prepared to.
Mm-mm.
Any other comments or questions from other commissioners?
I'd agree it's not part of the structure, so, I mean, unless you want to do like a Spanish Revival trash can.
Right.
Which I don't think you have to really do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Grant.
Well, yeah, my intention was I didn't want to put the cans out, and then I would have heard afterwards, well, we should have checked them with HPC, that's a historic landmark.
Yeah.
We don't like the appearance at all, so I think I'm hearing nobody objects to the appearance.
Too much.
Too much, it's okay, and then we need to check out to make sure there's no landmark issues.
Thank you.
I just want to make sure that everybody didn't object and say, absolutely not, it's Scotty, we like the pebble finish, leave what you have there, or something like that, yeah, so. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next we have the training presentation by City Attorney Matthew Summers. Are you prepared to begin?
Yes.
Commissioner Hill?
Yeah, I'd like to ask something. I know Matt's got a big, long presentation here. And this is a point of inquiry. We had an agenda that was issued some time back, and then our commissioners started dropping like flies, and we became a non-functional a commission because we couldn't generate a forum. Whatever happened to that agenda and the things that we didn't do back then and that we were supposed to be taking care of? I noticed that we did the trash can tonight, we elected officers, but it still doesn't address the fact that we had business at hand. Whatever happened to that business?
I think that if I'm speaking out of turn, please let me know. Since we lacked a quorum, and so most of the commissioners are new and probably haven't had this training, that it was just sort of a foundational thing, and that next month would be a more typical month for our meeting, And I fully intend, I have the agenda in front of me for February 11th, which was the first one that we missed.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think we will be taking up some of these old issues. I mean, I intend to.
Correct. I think the first point of order to establish, you know, a HPC commission that can all operate on the same platform, since we have 4 new members, is to do the training and talk, because one of the big important issues that's before the HPC is working on the ordinance change. And we just felt that this kind of brings everybody together. We can bring the new commissioners up to speed, because there is such a dramatic change in the complexity of the commission. We think it's only fair for everyone else to have the equal platform and not begin to discuss these really important issues until they have this fundamental training. And we have an interaction with how we want to handle, and that's down further in the agenda tonight, discussion of future agenda items, how we want to handle that, in particular, the modification or alteration of, or amendment, I guess I should say, of the municipal code, because there are some people that need to be brought up to speed, and how we're going to do that and where we want to go forward. And I think that's something we need to have under that particular agenda item.
So we can then bring up some items that is this going to be on that next agenda under?
Correct.
The future agenda items we can all bring up?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions before we begin this part of the? Okay, brace yourselves. This will be riveting.
I will try to make it as interesting as I can.
Mr. Summers.
Thank you, Chair McCready. And just to respond to one more comment on the previous point, the draft ordinance amendment, which you'll recall is a draft produced for discussion purposes. It's not a definitive answer or a anything definitive. It was a draft of revisions to the Historic Preservation Ordinance produced for discussion purposes with me as scribe for the ad hoc committee, which consisted of current Commissioner Hill and our valued former commissioners Walker and Boggs. That draft, I understand, will be coming back to the commission for discussion at, I'm not sure if it's the next meeting or the meeting after that. And the intention of staff and myself is that the commission discuss the draft and evaluate which elements you'd like to revise, and then which elements you'd like to recommend to the city council for amendment. Our previous discussion on the trash cans illuminates the point that there's certainly elements of the ordinance that would benefit from clarification or modification to make it less ambiguous and much clearer for both the staff, the commission, the council, and the applicant community. Certainly Commissioner Quinn and Commissioner Convery would also be, having recently worked on landmarks, I think you'll recall some areas of ambiguity as well that would benefit from clarification. And so that discussion will provide that opportunity to have that conversation. And in addition, you'll have a staff report from staff that'll outline the amendments as proposed and some thoughts on which ones make sense to recommend to the council in our experience in working with the draft. And with that, I'll turn to the training.
Thank you.
And so the training is intended to comply with AB 1234, which is a requirement that any new, in fact, not just new, all city officials, to include commissioners, board members, council members, anyone elected or appointed in that type of position, to take every 2 years, biennial training on ethics issues that's about 2 hours. And that will be my goal with this. I've also included a little bit on the Brown Act and the Public Records Act as well. And I'll try to note the areas that are more relevant to the commissioners as opposed to state council members who deal with a broader range of issues. So with that, we begin. So welcome. The training today will cover conflicts of interest, including the Political Reform Act, constitutional issues, transparency laws, competitive bidding requirements, and fair decision-making and processes, which would also pick up due process, and some tips on how to create a more functional commission. So for conflicts of interest, there are 6 basic sets of rules that govern conflicts of interest and when a commissioner can and cannot participate in making a decision or should recuse, and in some cases when a city is barred from entering into a contract, period. The first of these is Section 1090, Government Code Section 1090. then the Political Reform Act. Oh, and I'll note, on your dais, I put a copy of the slides, paper. It's in a version, and everyone should have received a copy, so you can take notes along the slides, too.
I don't think I got a copy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did, I have a bunch of copies here. I thought they were put out. Apparently not. And so that way, you'll have all the information available to take home. Common law due process picks up both bias issues and due process requirements that apply to making a decision that affects property right of an applicant. Nepotism, of course, is cannot make decisions that affect your family members or spouses. Incompatible offices is a doctrine that prevents someone from serving two masters. And Government Code 1126 is the section that provides you cannot have an incompatible office. Taking each in turn, just a quote from Mark Twain, always do right, gratify some and astonish the rest. Try to keep that in mind as you go through this. Government Code Section 1090 provides that public officials shall not be financially interested in any contract made by them in their official capacity or by any body or board of which they're members. It's an absolute prohibition on being interested in both sides of a contract by either an official or, in the case of a contract made by a board, by that board. For example, the city council could not enter into a contract in which one council member is the other side of the contract. The city's categorically barred from entering into that type of contract unless one of several exceptions applies. Because the Historic Preservation Commission does not generally participate in making contracts, this may not come up for you, but it's part of the required training, so I'll go through it relatively quickly. It applies even if the contract is reasonable and fair. It applies even if the contract is concluded through a public bidding process to the lowest bidder, and it applies even if an official abstains from participating in the contract, again, with certain exceptions. What constitutes making a contract? Signing, voting, approving, being involved in the specifications development, being involved in the initial discussions, essentially any step from conception of that particular specification through and including signing or approval or voting or adopting the contract. Any one of those steps constitutes participating in the contract, which requires you to assess whether you can participate in the contract, and if so, whether the city is barred from doing so. The remote interest exception is one of the three exceptions. And a remote interest is an interest that you as a board member cannot participate in the contract on, but the city can enter into the contract. It's a statutory list under Government Code Section 1091. The classic example is a council member who is also an employee of Apple Corporation and owns stock less than 3% of the company in Apple Corporation. The city's not barred from buying Mac computers through a regular procurement process, as long as that council member who owns Apple stock steps down and does not participate in making the contract. And then the non-interest exception is the it doesn't count exception, provided for by Government Code Section 1091.5. And the classic example here is that there's no financial interest in your own salary from government. So if you have contract cities, as Ojai does, and if you have a deputy sheriff who is on the city council, as is common in LA County, the deputy sheriff can vote on any contract between the county and the city except for the contracts with his department. So a deputy sheriff cannot vote on the sheriff's contract, but he can vote on the contract with animal services or the library or any other county contract, even though normally he'd be barred because it's his employer on one side and his city on the other. That exception was in fact written for that situation. And then the rule of necessity applies if there's simply no other provider of a service. That is not one I have ever seen used in cities that are not in the middle of nowhere. If you're in the middle of nowhere, there's only one provider of a given service. Ojai, I don't think, would take advantage of this exception, but it's nonetheless to be noted. Government Code Section 1090 has very harsh consequences, both for the official who participates in making a contract despite its prohibitions and for the contracting party. The contract is void at the city's option. The city can keep the benefit but need not pay for it. The official faces civil and criminal penalties. It is a felony. The DA, at least in LA County, I'm more familiar with, prosecutes these relatively regularly. They do not take kindly to violations of 1090. And the city is given the option of voiding the contract or keeping the benefits but not paying for it. I've had at least one client in which we asserted that, and the contracting party was quite unhappy, but it's a simple case. So if you're ever in the situation where you're concerned that you're anywhere near 1090, anywhere near this situation, please give me a call. We'll work through it. The commission doesn't participate in entering into too many contracts, so it may not come up much. But for example, it could come up if the commission was selecting a consultant to write a historic preservation report, for example. Then you'll be participating in making that contract. So and this goes for everything. Anytime you have a question on ethics issues or conflicts issues, please get in touch with me. Before I leave, I'll give you guys each my card, which has my phone number and email and cell phone and all the ways to get in touch with me.
Matt, can I ask you a question real quick?
Sure.
Does it come down to essentially a financial benefit that someone's receiving on some end?
Yep. It's if you're participating on both sides of the same deal. Even if you're not the signatory party on the other side, on the non-city side, if you own that company or if you have another deal with another party where you get a piece of that contract, then you're still barred.
But if it's a deal without any financial benefit?
Then it would depend on the exact facts of the deal.
And the reason I ask is, of course, I'm on the board of the museum.
There's an exception. Thank you for bringing that up. There's an exception.
I'm the treasurer, and I know that based on a conversation I'm going to have with Kathleen, that there's several items that are going to come before the HPC because they're changes that, are being made, but they have no financial benefit to anybody.
There's an exception for members of a nonprofit board if you're not compensated as a member of the board.
My wife wishes I was.
So and we should perhaps have a further conversation with the exact facts, but my sense is that you would fit under that exception
Okay.
for the work.
And we've raised this question before, but this time we actually have parts of the museum that are going to come before the HPC.
Yeah. And that wouldn't implicate 1090, that implicate the Political Reform Act itself, because there wouldn't be a contract directly between the city and the museum that would be reviewed by the commission, I would think. Although I know there is a contract between the city and the museum overall.
There is.
But I think we would fit under that exception, but we'll have a conversation. But good question, and thank you for reminding me of that exemption. Turning now to the Political Reform Act versus the common law. The Political Reform Act, Government Code, Section 87-100, and it's worth me quoting it. No public official at any level of state or, that's the regulations. No public official at any level of state or local government shall make, participate in making, or in any way attempt to use his official position to influence a governmental decision in which he knows or has reason to know he has a financial interest. I apologize for the gendered language, that's the statute. And this is the basic rule that governs the Political Reform Act. Here you see the regulations that the FPPC, the Fair Political Practices Commission, has developed under authorization from the statute to enforce the statute, which speak to a public official cannot participate in making or in any way use or attempt to use their position to influence the governmental decision when they have a disqualifying financial interest. They have a disqualifying financial interest if the decision will have a reasonably foreseeable material financial effect, distinguishable from the public generally, directly on the official, his immediate family, or any financial interest. And the FPPC's regulations, as approved by statute in a variety of court cases, have expanded upon the basic language of Government Code Section 87-100, which speaks to financial interest. They've expanded upon that to define it as material financial interest, in which the impact of a decision is reasonably foreseeable, such that you're not barred from participating in a decision if there's a minute possibility that you would benefit financially. It speaks to reasonably foreseeable and a material impact. In other words, they've added a bit of a rule of reason to some extent with the regulations. The Political Reform Act applies to public officials, which is defined as a member, an officer, an employee, or a consultant of a public agency, or those who serve in a staff capacity, or make decisions on behalf of the public agency, even if they're not an employee. That's myself. I file a Form 700 every year. I am bound by the Political Reform Act. If I make a decision if I help the Historic Preservation Commission approve a landmark, and I own that landmark, I could not participate. I don't own property in Ojai, but if I bought property in Ojai, I would have to recuse myself from any meetings concerning that property, even though I'm not an employee, but rather am official by contract. That's the situation. This includes members of the Historic Preservation Commission, as they are officers of the city. Financial interest is defined fairly broadly. It's your personal finances, the finances of any immediate family dependent, that is, a dependent child, an adult child is not considered a financial interest. Spouse, partner, business entities in which you have an investment of $2,000 or more, real property also valued at $2,000 or more, and any source of income in the past 12 months of $500 or more. And with regard to spousal sources of income, if you're treated as having an interest in half of their income under the community property rule in California. So if the spouse's interest is $1,000, then it's half to you, so that's $500 to you. And any business entity in which you are, regardless of your financial impact, a director, an officer, a partner, a trustee, an employee or management position. And then lastly, any donor or intermediary for a gift over $460 in the last 12 months. So anyone who gives you a gift over $460, again, there's certain exceptions that I'll get to on that slide, is also a source of income to you that you have to consider whether you can participate in a decision affecting them. So in this, you're thinking about, if you're voting on a application, if you have a direct interest, i.e. you own the application, you own the property, then you're recused. But if you have a financial interest in the owner, then you should consider recusing, unless, depending on the expected impact of the decision on the value of the interest. Or if you have a financial interest in the lessor, the landlord. So anytime you have a financial interest in a decision before you, put on your ethical hat and evaluate whether, in your sense, it is subject or not to the Political Reform Act's disqualification requirements. The commissioner handbooks that I know you have been handed out speak to that. I'm always available, staff's available to help you think through any particular facts on any particular decision. Yes?
In the instance of a property that comes before our commission, and you live in close proximity or not so close proximity, and your decision whether or not to approve it or not approve it would enhance the property value of your particular piece of property, do you have to recuse yourself in that instance?
It depends. And it depends in part on, there's two rules for real property. And in fact, if I could pause that question,
Okay.
that's about 2 slides up, so I'll answer it directly then. The Political Reform Act has a 4-step test. It used to be an 8-step test. They rewrote the rules last year, making everything more difficult. And now it's a 4-step test for whether or not there's a disqualifying conflict of interest. And the first is it reasonably foreseeable that the decision will have a financial effect on any of your financial interests? If yes, you go to step 2. Will that reasonably foreseeable financial impact be material? If yes, you go to step 3. Is that material, reasonably foreseeable financial impact distinguishable from the impact on the public generally? If no, then you go to step 4. If yes, it's the same. If it's the same as the impact on the public generally, then you don't have a conflict. And then if it's not, you go to step 4. And step 4 is, can you participate anyway, because there's an exception. And the exception is legally required participation, which is triggered when there's not enough to meet a quorum. And that's a further slide. And so this is the 4-step test to keep in mind as you're evaluating conflict of interest questions on the Political Reform Act in question.
What's material?
I'll get to that. That's the next slide, or 2 slides. First, step 1, reasonably foreseeable. So reasonably foreseeable breaks down in 2 ways. One is that direct involvement. You own the property, or you are the partner or a director of a company applying for a permit, or you're an employee of a company applying for a permit. To speak to Commissioner Aiken's point, you do not have an interest in a nonprofit on which you're the board if you aren't paid by the nonprofit, but you do have an interest, and compensation for expenses doesn't count as payment. It'd be an income payment. But if you have a salary from a applicant, then it would hit this reasonable foreseeable impact, and then you have to assess the further materiality. The more removed one is the not explicitly involved or the indirectly involved. That's the one you're speaking to Commissioner Hill about. You live near, but you don't own it directly. You live near it, so you would look to the next step. You'd look to step 2 to assess whether it's material. And indirectly involved most often comes up with either a competitor in your business. I'll point to a recent example from the council. The council, as you know, has been considering leaf blower rules and rewriting the leaf blower rules, and that debate continues. Councilmember Lara owns a landscape maintenance business. He's recused himself because even though he's not applied for or is not one of the proponents of the change in the leaf blower ordinance rules, his business is indirectly involved in that decision because it would regulate his business and it would regulate his competitors and affect their finances. Hence, he's recused on that basis. So that's indirectly involved. The other classic example is a restaurateur who sits on a commission should not hear an application for another restaurant across the way. There would be indirect competition because he would have an incentive to find a way to deny it. And the quote on the bottom here is this quote from the regulation. You assess whether a reasonable person in the similar situation would start to weigh the benefits and advantages to themselves and the cons to their own financial situation, rather than merely assessing the application on its own merits. Here we are in material. This is step 2. And in material, you assess it, and this is where the regulations used to be clear, and they rewrote them to be vague and not clear, which if I had my red pen, I'd rewrite them back. Unfortunately, I don't yet have that red pen to rewrite all the regulations from Sacramento. Nonetheless, onward we go. Material is now assessed on different types of bases depending on what the interest is at issue. For real property, it depends on whether it's a leasehold that you own or any other interest. For leaseholds, it's a relatively simple rule. You ask whether it changes the lease's termination date, it increases or decreases the potential rental value, it increases or decreases the actual rental value, and you have a sublease right. In other words, you could benefit from that change in value. It changes your allowed uses, or it otherwise impacts your use and enjoyment. And if it doesn't impact any of those lease terms, and it doesn't impact your overall use and enjoyment, then you would not be participating in making a decision on a property near a property that you have a leasehold in. If you have another interest in the property, you own it, or you have a mortgage, or you're a member of a trust that owns it, or some other interest other than a leasehold, then the new regulations require that you evaluate the impact on the property one of 2 ways. If the property at issue, the subject of the application, and your property are within 500 feet of each other, then you are absolutely barred from participating in the decision unless you get written advice from the FPPC immunizing you from participating in the decision. In general, you're entitled to rely on my advice as the city attorney representing the city, which includes the Historic Preservation Commission, which includes all the commissioners, with respect solely to historic preservation issues. I'm not your lawyer for other things. I'm only your lawyer for the Historic Preservation Commission. But unfortunately, with this one, they wrote out the ability to rely on the city attorney's advice. Instead, you have to get written advice from the FPPC if it's within that 500-foot circle. If it's outside the 500-foot circle, then you have to assess about 10 factors, of which the most important is whether it would reasonably foreseeably increase or decrease the value, or would it change the uses for the property, would it change its zoning, unless it's the zoning decision applicable to the all residential zones or the entire city. If it's rather than rezoning just property next door to yours, for example, or property down the hall, 510 feet away, 1,000 feet away, half a mile away. Does it change the development or income producing potential of the property? Does it affect the highest and best use of the property? Or lastly, would it cause a reasonably prudent person using due care and not consideration under the circumstances to believe that it would reasonably foreseeably affect the market value? This is the new language from the FPPC, this reasonable person standard. Unfortunately, there hasn't been any case law yet developing what that means as to how much of an impact on property value it has to cause to trigger this recusal requirement, even if you're not nearby. So if we've got one of those running around, I invite you to give me a call and we can have a conversation about to what extent it's going to affect your value. If it's, I would look at it, use your senses as ethical individuals, use your sense of reason. Is this of a nature that it's truly going to impact the value, or is this just, is a decision too far removed from the value of your property? Assessing what is being considered in the application. This is all, again, if we're outside that 500-foot donut.
Well, one of the things that has occurred, and as I look at the new board, a number of us live in kind of an area that has a number of landmark houses. And that's the Foothill Road group, all along that ridge. And a number of us would be facing the same type of situation. So that's why it has a particular impact that I could see in regard to this rule.
I think what would make sense would be first for staff to put together some maps based on, so we can get the exact dimensions of 500 feet from each of the houses owned on Foothill Road.
Well, I've known about the 500-foot rule.
But for the ones.
That's always been there.
Right, but for the ones that are outside the 500-foot rule,
Yeah.
it's a matter of assessing, would approving another landmark increase or decrease reasonably increase or decrease the value of the other landmark properties? I'm not going to give you a direct answer tonight because it's a hypothetical at this point. What I would say that we will do in evaluating that is we'll look at our sense of what's driving property values there. I think it might make sense to speak to a realtor to get a sense of what drives value. My initial sense is that real estate value is so dependent on the property itself and the general context of its neighborhood. Is it residential or not? Is it industrial or not? Such that mere presence or absence of another landmark that is 500 plus feet away would not impact your value in a way that it would bar you from participating in a decision to landmark a property 600 to 1,000 feet away. But we'll evaluate it further once we have the specific facts. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, it's kind of a sticky wicket, but
I admit it is
anxious to hear your.
It's one to carefully evaluate.
Yeah.
And in particular, it might be the case that a full landmarking as opposed to a modification to an existing landmark. One would have a perhaps greater effect on value than the other between the types of decisions. Because you look at both the type of the decision and the proximity of the property and the impact on your property in evaluating the necessity to recuse or not. We'll continue the conversation.
Okay.
With regard to sources of income, we're still on materiality, so we were talking about real property. Now we're looking at source of income. This would be, again, anyone who's paid you more than $500 in the last 12 months. It's assessing if their subject of the decision would impact or not the basis for which you received income from them. So if you have a classic example would be you received income from them in the course of providing services to them, and the decision at issue would increase their need for those services. You might want to consider recusing in that case. Versus you received income from them, and the decision at issue is entirely irrelevant to why you received income from them. that might not require recusal. Again, to be evaluated, it's a little bit difficult to speak in the abstract, but it's to be evaluated based on the specifics of the situation. If you have a person who is a source of income, if you there is an exception for retail sales. If you're a retailer and the person is a customer of yours and your customers constitute a significant segment of the public, then there's no obligation to recuse based solely on an individual customer. Think of that as the grocer's exemption. If you own the grocery store in town, you aren't barred from participating in every decision because everyone in town buys groceries from you. It's a matter of, is it specific to is there something different than the average customer? And I'm not sure if anybody runs a grocery store, but it's an illustrative example. The last one to call out is business entities. If your financial interest is a business entity, either one you own a significant amount of stock in, more than 2,000, or one that you own outright, or you're a member of, or a director, or if you have a trust or an LLC and you're a director of your LLC or a member of your LLC, the old standard was a dollar amount standard. Did the decision impact or the value of that business entity by X dollars? Keeping with our theme, they got rid of the dollar standard, the FPPC, and have replaced it with this new, more loosey-goosey standard. It is now asked two questions. Is the business entity at issue a party of the decision? In other words, if you own an LLC and that LLC has applied for a permit, you're barred from participating in it because you have a direct interest in the business entity that's the subject of the application. If instead it's not a party, then you assess, would it contribute to a change in the value of the business entity? Whether if it's stock, the publicly held price, or if it's a privately held business, would it reasonably change the value of the business? And then at that point, you're assessing how big of the impact is the decision against the value of the business. So the classic example would be you have stock in a large publicly traded conglomerate, and they've applied for a permit, and it's a sufficiently small project that it's not likely to change the value of the conglomerate, you wouldn't have to recuse. Versus if you have an ownership interest in a small business and the decision at issue would be a landmark application for their sole property, their sole retail store, then you'd want to recuse because that would likely change the value of that business. Again, to be assessed based on the facts at issue. That is materiality. Our next step is if you determine that you have a financial interest and that it's reasonably foreseeable that the decision at issue will impact that financial interest, and that impact will be material, then you ask one of the two exceptions. This is the first exception. Is the impact reasonably distinguishable from the impact on the public generally? And here you ask, is the impact of the decision unique or not unique, assessing it against a significant segment of the business entities, the public, or the real property? And is there no disproportionate impact? So here the classics are a citywide decision, citywide tax, a citywide assessment, a general plan update to the entire city, a rezoning of the entire city, as opposed to some particular piece of it. Or perhaps if the city council votes to put a business license tax increase on the ballot, that impacts every business owner all the same. It's an equal percentage increase. The council members who are business owners would not be barred from participating in that choice because even though there's a direct impact on their business, the impact is indistinguishable from that impact on the public generally. This exception doesn't come up too often outside of that citywide decision-making point. The further exception, the slides are out of order. My slides are slightly out of order. Nonetheless, this is helpful. This is the assessment of when you're participating in making a decision. It's fairly broad. Voting, of course, but even if you're not voting, if you're discussing, if you're lobbying, if you're
Discussing with who?
the other commissioners,
Okay.
or with staff as well. If you're in the city's decision-making chain, you're obviously not barred from discussions with the general public or with other members. It's a matter of, are you in the city decision-making chain? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would object if I could.
No. Yeah, talk to your wife all you wish. Of course, if you have any confidences from the city, for example, if we were ever to take the Historic Preservation Commission into closed session, that you would not speak with your wife about. But nonetheless,
Discussing means dual. I can say, but I can't listen, right?
if you're
Discussion implies two people talking back and forth. If I express an opinion, I'm not discussing.
that is true, although do be cautious in some contexts, because sometimes people a statement can always ends up resulting in a response period. And here we're back to that last exception, the legally required participation. This is a limited rule of necessity. If you have so many commissioners that are conflicted that you can't make a decision, and you have to make that decision, then you draw straws or draw hats to see who can participate. I have put this to use. I've never put this to use in 5 years of doing this. I have prepared to put it into effect once. In that case, we didn't need to because they decided not to recuse in the end. But it's not common, but I'll note it as a possibility. And if you're going to do that in the course of this, you need to disclose all the conflicts at issue, publicly draw the straws or numbers out of a hat or whatnot, and then continue. So if you have a conflict, we've gone through this test. If we've determined there is a conflict, then what to do? Publicly identify the conflict. I own business that's the subject of the decision. I own property within 500 feet. Exit the room. Don't participate in the discussion. And there's no reason to leave the room if it's on consent, though, is the exception. So if it's on, if it's a discussion item, a public hearing, exit the room. And the reason to exit the room is so to prevent any possibility that your continued presence in the room could influence the other commissioners. It's the FPPC's belt and suspenders approach, ensuring that everyone is completely removed from any possible challenge. They're afraid of the classic, the glaring from the angry commissioner in the back. I would expect none of you would do that, but nonetheless, it's the rule, so I noted. And we always, and if we have a recusal, we try to make sure that the record reflects these points. If you decide to run for an elected position, bear in mind that contributions to your campaigns are not considered income or gifts under the Political Reform Act. However, you do need to bear in mind that a donor of more than $250 results in a requirement to evaluate disqualification. And if you do run for office, bear in mind that there are also a number of reporting requirements with the FPPC for your campaign treasury. And I couldn't not give you advice on that, but there are a number of eminently qualified elections lawyers out there who are very focused in the FPPC's rules. Give them a call if you decide to run for council. For the point with regard to loans and commercial interests, if you're borrowing money from a contractor with the agency, then you have to not participate in the decisions related to that contractor, unless, of course, the exception is that it's a generally available commercial loan, i.e., if it's a standard mortgage from Bank of America, you're fine in voting on a Bank of America project. If it's a special loan not available on regular terms, then you are barred from participating in that discussion. And an elected official, the council cannot accept personal loans of $500 or more unless it's in writing and they jump through a few other hoops. That rule does not apply to commissioners, only to the council and the county board of supervisors. With regard to leaving office, the council members, the elected officials, cannot participate for a year after leaving office in business before the body. This is designed to prevent the revolving door, as we often see in Washington. Someone leaves the one federal department and suddenly turns right around and starts lobbying the same department. To my knowledge, and I'll confirm this, the city's code does not extend this to anyone other than the council, but keep that in mind. And Government Code 87407 prohibits someone who's trying to arrange a job with a employer from participating in a decision affecting that employer, which also makes sense. You can't use your position on a board to negotiate for a better job or a better salary at a future job. on any questions under the Political Reform Act, and now under the Government Code, Section 1090 issues as well, which you'll recall is the prohibition on being on both sides of a contract. The FPPC is available for advice. They have a phone number that's informal advice. They provide written advice as well. They are not the speediest on giving written advice. We have a pending letter for Councilmember Haney on another issue that has been pending for 2.5 months. But it is useful nonetheless. Informal advice from the FPPC, either they have an informal advice line via email and the phone number is up there, does not provide immunity. Written advice provides immunity from a challenge under the Political Reform Act. Advice from myself is your first line of defense. I'm happy to give conflicts advice to any commissioner on any issue. And my conflicts advice can give you a sound legal answer, and I always provide citations when I provide advice. I unfortunately can't give you immunity. Only written advice from the FPPC can provide you immunity from a Political Reform Act challenge. With regard to the PRA enforcement, it has criminal enforcement if there's a knowing and intentional violation, civil enforcement, fines and penalties. The FPPC has the power to impose fines by itself or to take it to court. Ventura County District Attorney has a public integrity unit that, among other things, tracks violations of the Fair Political Practice Commission's regulations and the Political Reform Act and enforces them, in addition to the Brown Act and a few others. And lastly, of course, the Court of Public Opinion. The public is not as familiar with all the exceptions. Which gets to this quote from Asimov: "Never let your sense of morals get in the way of doing what is right. Always evaluate what you should be doing and assess whether that's what you are doing." With regard to common law bias, switching away from the Political Reform Act, common law bias issues are you can't use your position for private benefit out of your public position. And it also speaks to due process. And this one I think I'll highlight as particularly relevant to any commission making land use decisions. You need to always maintain an open mind when you're coming to the commission to hear an application. Wait till you've received all the facts, heard the testimony from the staff, the applicant, the public, an appellant, any other interested member, evaluated all the facts, and evaluated the law at issue before you make a decision. And refrain from announcing or stating publicly any decisions until you're here at the commission voting. Commissioners get in trouble when they make comments in the public. The classic example is a case called Nasha versus City of Los Angeles. And in the Nasha case, and I'll send a copy around, make a note to do that, send Nasha. In that case, a planning commissioner in the city of LA was a member of an HOA and wrote an article in a newsletter unsigned that asserted that a project would be a threat to a wildlife corridor. And it came out and the decision was challenged. It came out in discovery that the commissioner had wrote the newsletter article, and it resulted in reversal of the decision, a new hearing without that commissioner present, because the commissioner had asserted an opinion in writing on a project before it was presented to the commission. And that's when you get it. That's when commissioners are required to recuse themselves, and cities have to redo things, and litigation costs go up, and risk arises. And the key here is to ensure that every applicant has a constitutionally fair decision-making process, that they're not coming into a room that's stacked against them, or where people have made a decision ahead of time. They're coming into a room where folks are fully and fairly considering their application, their comments, all of the information. And this doesn't preclude holding opinions. It precludes being closed. You can certainly, I would expect that after you review a full packet with the staff report and the landmark designation at issue and the full maps and the plans, you'll have formed an opinion on the project. Refrain from articulating that opinion in writing or to anyone else, and be open to change in that opinion. You'll come in, you'll have reviewed everything. Be open to change when you get to the meeting and fully evaluate what's presented before you make your vote, before you make your decision. If you do that, you'll be fine with regard to common law due process. The other key point to note here is that it's about the appearance of bias. You're thinking about what looks like a conflict. Try to avoid those. It may not be a conflict. We may be able to win the lawsuit, but as was noted earlier, the court of public opinion would be different. Here's two examples of pictures that weren't thought through when they took the picture. And that's where it's important to keep an open mind in every application and avoiding the appearance of impropriety. And part of that is also, as you'll see the chair do over time, running a meeting in a way that gives fair shake to all sides. And sticking to the 3-minute time limits or 2 minutes, and ensuring that everyone is heard fairly and in compliance with the requirements of the Brown Act and other applicable law. Turning to nepotism for a moment. There's no specific laws on nepotism, but it's been read by a few cases as part of the common law bias issues. And you're barred from directly employing, to the extent the commission would make an employment decision, barred from employing a family member or a close relative, spouse, dependent child. And to my knowledge, the city does not have a written anti-nepotism policy. I'll confirm that. I don't think the city does have one, but it's important to keep in mind. And there are certain federal grants that have stricter anti-nepotism requirements that the Public Works Department bears in mind every time it does a federally grant-funded project. Next, incompatible offices. This is based on the theory that you can't serve two masters. And the classic example is a city employee who runs for and wins a seat on city council. When they take the oath of office to become a council member, their employment ceases. You cannot be both an employee and a council member of the city because you're deemed to have too many masters. As an employee, you report to the city manager. As a council member, you report to the voters. Two inconsistent masters. You can't be over yourself. That's the classic example. None of the commissioners are employees of the city, so I don't need to spend too much time on that one. And here's the government code section that derives that. It's government code section 1126. This also speaks a little bit broader to not taking on any other employment that would directly conflict with your role as a commissioner. The classic example would be, as you see this not so much here, but in other cities that have formal lobbying firms that lobby for developers. A member of a development lobbying firm should strongly consider not being a planning commissioner. But it's possible if you carefully recuse from anything in which you're lobbying on behalf of any developer, you recuse carefully from those projects. A few other Political Reform Act issues. Statements of economic interest. These are the Form 700s that Rhonda, before she retired, emailed you about. These are required by the city's conflict of interest code and also by implementing government code sections. And this is to provide a public assessment or a public accounting of your financial interests with exemptions for your personal home, among others, that allows the public to understand what the financial interests of those making decisions on their behalf are. For commissioners, you are listed in the most recent conflict of interest code as having full disclosure, and the city uses a standard conflict of interest code of the FPPC, which means you have to disclose financial interest in the city. It doesn't require disclosure of all interests around the world because the city doesn't have jurisdiction over the world. Just financial interest in the city. And there's your, the most common would be real property, business entities in which you own $2,000 or more or 10%, and your salary if you are a salaried employee of a company or any other significant source of income. Your personal home is not required to be listed, but if you have income property or vacation property or have a real estate portfolio, property that is not your primary residence must be listed. And the Form 700 packet that I also believe was given to you has some instructions and explanations of particular situations, and I'm also happy to provide particular questions. I think Commissioner Vogt has a question.
Yeah, where do I find this? I've been puzzling through 700 for an extended period of time, and I haven't found these considerations of financial interest in the city and so forth.
It's all built into the FPPC's regulations, which are also summarized in the FPPC's instructions for the Form 700. And if those haven't been sent to you, I will send that out. I'll make a note of that as well.
I think they get the form, not the
Oh, you Ms. Ward is explaining that you get the form, but not the whole instruction packet.
I'll just tell you, did you get the whole?
It's like 6-8 pages.
Oh, you did? When I get it, I just get the form, okay.
Matt, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
It seems like the form is done after completion of the year. It's kind of an after the fact.
Within 30 days of taking office.
There's a couple of requirements. The form is first within 30 days of taking office.
Okay, but when, for example, when Rhonda sent me mine a few months ago in anticipation of re-upping, you know, I was signing for something that had happened over the past, since the last form was done 12 months ago.
Right, and that's where each form has a 12-month look back. So when you sign the form on,
What I'm saying, when I do that form, it's looking backwards, not looking forward.
right, it's a 12-month look back because it's assessing what was your income for the year, what did you own for that previous year.
So it's saying, basically, now that you've been a commissioner for 12 months, tell us if you had any conflicts in the past 12 months.
Not if you had any conflicts, it's rather tell us if your financial interests have changed. So in the classic example is if you bought property, not your primary residence that is, in the last 12 months, then you list it as a new property because you own it when you're signing the form. Or if you had 10,000 in Apple stock and you had listed 10,000 in Apple stock on the form, previous form, and you sold it in the year, then you mark it, it's still listed as a financial interest because you owned it during that previous year, but you mark Apple stock, there's a box for amount, the box is not, you don't write the dollar amount, you write the ranges. You check the box for the 10K range, and then you put disposed of date. And you give the month and year you disposed of it. Right, thank you. The Form 700s are due 3 due dates. Assuming office is within 30 days of assuming office. Leaving office is 30 days of leaving office. You have to do a final statement. And then on an annual basis, every April 1st.
It does come with financial.
And it does, and thank you, Ms. Wolden, it does come with a $10 a day fine if you're late on submitting your form, which does add up. So
I have a question.
Sure.
But Apple stock wouldn't have been actually listed on there because it's not an Ojai company, is that correct?
that is true, that's a good point.
I mean,
To my knowledge, they don't have an Apple store in Ojai.
I'm not really sure what's going on with that form.
Yeah, no, you list what's in Ojai, so you're right, that Apple stock is not the best example of that one. Sunnyvale would be one where that works. Or here I would list property you own in town, if you own property in town that's not your primary residence, or if anyone owns a business here, I'd list that. But a company that merely does business in town but doesn't have a physical presence or doesn't have a major presence wouldn't qualify. So that's Apple. Certainly people here have Apple products, there's one right next to me, but they don't have an Apple store in town. As opposed to Chevron has a gas station here. I'd be safe and list them if it's over that 2,000 trigger. And the trigger on those interests is 2,000 in value. Or if you have more than 10% ownership in a business entity, even regardless of the value. Further slide on Form 700s. And this also explains a little bit about why they made this requirement, which is fairly onerous. And I do it every year for 4 cities now. A fair amount of paperwork. It is intended to let the public understand what could be driving the people who are making decisions for them, and to allow the public to assess whether there's conflicts that haven't been recused or should be considered, or if the council member or commissioner is making a decision on an applicant that they shouldn't be making a decision on. It gives the public a check. It's part of the grand public awareness elements of California law. Gift restrictions. Quote from John Anuli, "What you get free costs too much." Local elected officials or designated employees, which means the commissioners here, because you're designated on the Conflict of Interest Code, cannot accept a gift from a single source over more than $460. This has not been updated. I apologize for that. They update the gift limit every 2 years. $460 is the limit for 16-17. And a gift aggregating 50 or more must be reported on your Form 700. And that's 50 or more from a single source in the last year. These rules were also rewritten 2 years ago, 4 years ago. And there are a number of exceptions that will classify most gifts. Aside from folks who spend a lot of time in smoke-filled rooms, most folks don't end up reporting gifts because most of the gifts that you receive over the year fall into one or more of the exceptions. And often you'll see council members buy down value of gifts so that they don't end up with a reportable gift. The classic example is a client appreciation dinner. The dinner might be $60. The council member would pay $11, so the value of the gift was $49. That's not reportable. That is an allowed practice. The question is it a gift? Gift is anything where you don't provide full consideration. So if you get a rebate or a discount, or you have a straight cash gift or a gift in kind as well. And it includes gifts to members of your immediate family, that's dependent child and spouse, unless the person giving the gift to the dependent child or spouse had a pre-existing relationship and is not a lobbyist or otherwise has business before your agency. A gift is not a gift if it's informational, if it's classic home hospitality, a gift from any one of your family members, which does include pretty much anybody who qualifies family. They recently expanded that. And the reciprocal gifts is I go to lunch, I'll pay, you go to lunch, you pay. That's not a gift. If it is, there's an existing social relationship, and it doesn't pick up lobbyists. You can't suddenly become a friend with a lobbyist. And most of the gift rules are particular for registered lobbyists, that is, which I haven't seen a registered lobbyist work in Ojai the entire time I've been here, so that would be more of an LA thing. Further exceptions. 2 tickets to a ceremonial event. The classic here is the council member throws out the first pitch at a baseball game and gets 2 tickets. He's performing a role in the game by throwing the first pitch. So the 2 tickets to the game for him and his spouse are not reportable. Gambling awards, you report those as income, not a gift, because you won it in Vegas. Wedding, if you're now this would be not the gift, not your wedding gifts, but rather for your wedding, but rather if you go to a wedding and they have a gift at every place as is common now, that doesn't count. Bereavement gifts, anything kind of the neighborly, being a good neighbor is your neighbor brings you cookies or a pie, small town type things. That is not that doesn't qualify as a gift. And if you have a legitimate dating relationship, not a gift unless it's a lobbyist. And human compassion. Don't date lobbyists. The reporting requirements are very high. And then 2 further ones. Close friend. If you have a long-term personal relationship, a gift from your friend is not a gift that's reportable. And there's the catch-all. If it's very clear that it's not a lobbyist or someone who's trying to influence you, then the gift is exempt. So as I stated at the beginning, almost all of the gifts, in fact, probably all of the gifts you receive in a given year aren't going to be reportable. It's under one or more of these exceptions. You're looking at, if you're getting a gift from a lobbyist or a developer, think about it. If you're getting a gift from someone commonly with business before the city, think about it. If it's just a friend or a family member, you're fine. And again, if on all of this, call me if you have questions. In terms of the gift, giving through an intermediary, if someone is given money or a gift basket and told, "I'll go give this to someone else," then you assess the source is the person who originally gave it and not the intermediary. And if you have $40 checks as gifts from one person given to a number of individuals as straw givers and then back to the same person, that still counts as a gift from the original person. You'll have sussed out these were written to close loopholes that certain Sacramento folks exploited for a while. And the same thing with regard to a group, it's all divided up on the gifts divided up across the donors if it's a number of individuals that paid for it. The gift is dated based on when you're given the promise, not when you receive it. And now if you redirect the gift to a charity that you don't hold a position with, then it's not a gift. That old rule had a few more exceptions. Travel. Certain travel payments are subject to gift restrictions and may be reportable. This is, again, the basic rule is if you're being given a trip by a lobbyist or a developer or someone with business before the city, question whether you should be reporting it or whether it's prohibited. But if it is a friend or a relative or a previous existing relationship, you're probably fine. And they rewrote these rules 2 years ago. 3 categories. Not reportable and unlimited is ride sharing, any government paid travel, bona fide business travel, or your private travel, and campaign travel that's funded by your campaign if you're running for office. Reportable but unlimited reportable on your Form 700. That is federal government travel, a presentation at a conference paid by a charity or a foreign government, or travel related to your business, your official business paid by your agency. And reportable and limited is a trade association, a lobbyist. This is the category where you would, the junkets is that category. You're limited to $460 a year in junkets from a single source. $460 a year total and from a single source worth of junkets. And then 2 examples here. If an elected official gives a speech or is on a panel, then they receive travel payments for that put on by the conference, it's reportable but not subject to the limit. And with regard to local filers, the Historic Preservation Commissioners, travel within the course and scope of your employment or from a properly paid council-approved city travel expense is not reportable or subject to the limit. A few more exceptions. Your travel with regard to your business, if you have a business and your expensing travel is not reportable, and there's an exception, a specific exception for trips to view recycling facilities. One further point on travel, a public official cannot be given a discount by a transportation company. This is a weird rule, but it prohibits a free bus pass for all council members or a free bus pass for all commissioners. And there's an exception for no worries. This only applies to officers elected and non-elected, which includes the commission, but not to employees. And it applies to interstate and foreign carriers. And it's the violation would be forfeiture of office. And it applies to interstate travelers, carriers, regardless of whether they do business in California, and it's business and personal travel. Honorariums, which is a payment for providing a speech. A local elected office holder, candidate for elected office, or designated employee, which includes the commissioners, cannot accept an honorarium for giving a speech. And this is an absolute prohibition. There are a couple of exceptions. If you return the money within 30 days, donate it to the city's general fund, and you don't get a deduction for that, or if you turn it around and donate it to a bona fide charity. This, again, is those payments for speeches. So if you're collecting money for speeches, read up on these rules. And this is intended to prohibit the practice of current officials from giving speeches at high value and making that a business, as is common at the federal level. Mass mailing restrictions. Items prepared and mailed at public expense cannot feature an elected officer affiliated with the agency, cannot include the name, the photograph, or other reference if it's prepared in coordination with the officer, and this applies to more than 200 or more pieces of mail. This is intended to prevent council members from employing the city's mailing practices and the city's general fund to provide campaign mailing. Distinct from the federal rules is the members of Congress have the franking privilege. A few other restrictions on conflict of interest issues. Gifts of public funds. Under the California Constitution, Article 16, Section 6, the city may not give public funds away. And therefore, all expenditures of public funds must be for a public purpose. In assessing that, you ask, does it serve the public interest? The rule is that public funds can't be used for personal, non-public purposes, including campaigns. Public resources includes cash, funds, in-kind support, staff time, office equipment, supplies. It excludes incidental uses. Sending one email is okay. Sending a day's worth of emails is not. The penalties are disqualification from office, criminal, civil, up to $1,000 civil penalties, $1,000 per day. And the goal here is to prevent the council or any commissioners running for office from converting public employees to their personal assistants or to a campaign staff. As these sets of rules most often come up in the election context, and most of them are written after one or another politician did something they shouldn't have done. Article 11, Section 10A prohibits extra compensation as a further element of the public funds, of the gift of public funds rule. You're entitled to compensation for service provided as per your contract, not for more compensation later. There's an exception for new MOUs with regard to union employees. Bribery, Penal Code Section 68. Every officer who asks for, receives, agrees to receive, or receives any bribe is guilty of a bribery, which is a felony. It is prison, fine, loss of office, disqualification from office. Anyone convicted of certain felonies, including bribery, is barred from public office for life. Embezzlement. Penal Code Section 424 and Government Code Section 8314 do not embezzle from the city. Personal use, private loans, refusal to turn over public money, any situation in which you're converting the public's funds to your own or to your own use is embezzlement. This is prohibited. Criminal, civil penalties, you lose office for life. It also picks up campaign use of property. The same thing with converting an assistant to be your campaign assistant is a gift of public funds problem. It's also an embezzlement problem because you're embezzling the public's time, city time. There's the exception again for incidental and minimal use. One email is fine. A day's worth of emails is not. And embezzlement also picks up in-kind embezzlement. We had a client a couple of years ago where the HR director was embezzling vacation time. That was immediately referred to the DA. Due process. And this one I'll call out as a bit of a particular focus for this commission because you spend time considering land use appeals and land use applications. The Constitution guarantees, state and federal, that no one may be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. Due process is defined generally as notice and an opportunity to consider an item. It kicks in, most importantly for this commission, in the administrative hearing context. If we have a hearing on a work permit application, that's a quasi-judicial process in which you're acting as a quasi-judicial commission. What that means is that you're charged by the municipal code and the council to evaluate that application on its merits and on its facts and make a decision based on those merits without bringing in personal biases, without bringing in outside information, and in a manner that provides that applicant with due process, with a notice and an opportunity to be heard, and consideration and a decision maker set free from bias. And that speaks to the point I was making earlier about be open to all the facts that come before you, be open to the application, and be open to its merits. That's all part of providing a fair hearing. In addition, it's complying with the Brown Act, complying with the Public Records Act, complying with the requirement to give everyone a fair opportunity to make their points in the hearing. Due process generally requires notice of the action, which is accomplished when we send out notices of public hearing of a proposed decision on a land use application, an opportunity for the person to prepare, that's that 10-day rule before 10 days notice, and an opportunity to be heard, which is the opportunity to speak at the hearing on their application, and then a fair and impartial hearing before this illustrious commission, which is your fair and impartial hearing body. That's it on conflict of interest issues. Are there any questions on those before I turn to the Public Records Act? All right, Public Records Act. Popular government without popular information or the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy, or perhaps both. President Madison. The Political Reform Act serves to ensure that the public is fully aware of what information the city has, because the city's information is the public's information, subject to certain exceptions. And this first slide is a broad tip. Anytime we've got a records request, which could mean someone at a commission meeting saying, I want to see the landmark application, as we have had a moment ago, or we have a member, whether a commissioner or a member of the public, city's best practice is to treat that as a records request, and we will get you that information. We'll get all the commissioners that information. It's a matter of, there's no requirement that a Public Records Act request to be on a particular form. It's a request to the city for records. The purpose of the PRA, and to quote from the statute, in enacting this chapter, the legislature, mindful of the right of individuals to privacy, finds and declares that access to information concerning the conduct of the people's business is a fundamental and necessary right of every person in this state. And in the 2014 election, this was reconfirmed by the voters when they constitutionalized the Public Records Act and the Brown Act, and made those elements of Article 1 of the Constitution. What is a record? A record is anything in writing or any document concerning the public's business. It's quite broadly defined. It has to be reduced to a writing, but it can be written, paper, electronic, a spreadsheet, a photograph, any document in any form is a public record. Employment contracts are included. My firm's contract with the city is a public record. Not the bills, but the contract. Any email is a public record as well, with the possible exception. And that includes, at the moment, and this last point is worth calling out with regard to emails, the courts are split at the moment on whether emails on personal devices and personal email accounts that are not controlled on city servers are indeed public records. At the moment, the California Supreme Court is considering the issue in a case arising out of San Jose. My advice to the council has been, and to you, is that at the moment, no court has ruled definitively that emails on a private server, on private devices that never are controlled or in the possession of the city are not public records because they're not in the possession of the city. That is under review by the Supreme Court, and it may change. But at the moment, they can be defensively treated as not public records. Of course, in the interest of all full transparency, you might bear that in mind. And this includes, that would be solely with emails still on that private server. Any email sent from a private server to the city server becomes a public record because it's on the city server. Records retention policies, the city has one. It specifies how long records are to be kept and whether they're to be kept at all. Some records are drafts that are kept for use. The notes you might take as you're putting together documents. Those aren't retained in the course of business, versus minute books that are retained permanently, or ordinances that are retained permanently, agendas that are retained for 2 years. And any destruction of city records requires city council approval and city attorney approval. Records must be made available for inspection during business hours through the clerk's office, as is done here. Confidential portions are redacted or exempt. Confidential could be exempt from the Public Records Act or otherwise protected by one or more privileges. Attorney-client privilege, deliberative process privilege, a few others. The requirement is to provide the copies or the document itself for review promptly, and the city cannot charge for staff time in hunting down documents, but can charge the reasonable copy costs. And the city has 10 days to respond to the request initially, and that initial response could either be the documents, here they are, or they're available, come get a copy, or it could be, we need more time, you have a voluminous request. Drafts that are not retained in the ordinary course of business do not need to be retained and are not public records because they're not retained for the public's, they're not retained as documents. There's a few other exemptions, pending litigation, personnel files, medical files, some more exemptions. Most important here would be attorney-client privilege records, which would mean that for the commissions most relevant to you guys, if we have a particularly litigious applicant and a particularly complex application, it might be the case that I would send you a memorandum providing my opinion on a legal issue subject that's part of that application. I would provide you that memorandum under the attorney-client privilege, and that would not be a public record. The applicant could not see that unless and until the council waived privilege. The home address and the home address and phone number of public officials cannot be posted on the city's website without obtaining their permission. That includes the commissioners as appointed officials. And there's a further prohibition on posting that information. With regard to requests, the city has a duty to help you in your request, to help identify records that would be responsive, and to provide an index of records that we're submitting to you. And in the context of an application that seeks, or a request that seeks records that are exempt, we're required to provide the basis for which the exemption is being asserted. With regard to electronic records, the city must make records available in the format in which they exist. In other words, if the city has an Excel spreadsheet of some information, it's required to make that available in the same Excel format, unless it is subject to an exemption. And we can only recover the direct cost of duplication, the cost of the flash drive or the CD with the file. The exception being if we have to write software to query the database to get the information, then we can charge a requester for writing the software. That one doesn't come up too often. There's a further exception that is used every so often. It's in the general balancing test, Government Code Section 6255, which allows the city to withhold records if, on balance, the harm to the public from providing the records outweighs the benefit to the public from providing the records. Harm to the public from not providing the records outweighs from providing the records outweighs the benefit to the public from providing the records. The key in thinking about the balancing test is that in both cases you're assessing the public's benefit and harm, rather than assessing the benefit of the city from withholding the records against the benefit to the applicant from getting them. It's assessing the public's harm and benefit, ensuring that the records are released in a way that is most beneficial to the public, not necessarily to the city. Any requester can sue to challenge a denial of records. These cases can proceed fairly quickly. If the city loses, we pay the fees of the requester, and the city can only get attorney's fees if a lawsuit seeking records that have been denied is clearly frivolous. I've never seen cities get fees, but I have seen cities pay fees to a requester on losing a suit over public records. Some recommendations, and keep these in mind as you're writing emails to staff. Don't create unhelpful records. My advice on email is very simple. Assume all emails will be on the front page. Now, they won't always be on the front page, but assume that's the case. And bear that in mind as you're writing emails. And I tell the same thing to staff, to council, to commissions, every time I give this training. Assume it's on the front page. Then write your email. Keep that in mind as you're writing your email, because it may well be on the front page. And think about whether you would like that to be on the front page. With regard to providing something to the entire commission, it must be recommended to copy staff so that a copy can be retained in the city's files. And these are more, the last points are more for the city employees maintaining records. Separate out what's exempt and what's not. Brown Act, open meetings law. Government ought to be all outside and no inside. President Wilson. The Brown Act's basic point is quoted here. All meetings of the legislative body shall be open and public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting of the legislative body of a local agency except as provided in this chapter. And the Brown Act has extended legislative body to mean the council, commissions, boards, committees, any committee created by formal action. Thus, all of the statements in the Brown Act that speak to legislative body include the Historic Preservation Commission, because it has continuing jurisdiction and was created by the City Council. A meeting is any congregation of all the members, of a quorum of members of a body at the same time or place to hear, discuss, or deliberate. And this speaks to Commissioner Vogue's earlier point about hearing is also a meeting, even if it's not just discussion. To speak to your earlier point about discuss versus hear, the Brown Act defines a meeting as any congregation of a majority of the members of the body to hear, discuss, or deliberate. So even if it's only one person speaking and the others are just listening, that still qualifies as a meeting. And meeting picks up whether it's in person as we are now, or if it is through other electronic means or through an intermediary, a telephone conference, any congregation of a group, or any time that you're all in the same thinking space. Whether it's a Skype meeting would qualify as a meeting. A lawful meeting is like we have tonight. The agenda is posted 72 hours in advance for a regular meeting or 24 for a special meeting. The agenda is posted on City Hall's front door, on the website, and is made available to the public. And any information that's given to the public's body, that's given to a majority of the commission, is made available to the public upon request as well. That would be agenda packets, staff reports. And at a meeting, you can only discuss what's on the agenda. And there is always an opportunity for public comments. With regard to public comment, the Brown Act requires providing an opportunity for public comment on general matters before the jurisdiction of the body at every regular meeting, as we do every meeting. If we have a special meeting, you're only obligated to provide comment on the items on that agenda. And you'll see the council do this. Regular council meetings, there's always general public comment. Special council meetings, there's no general public comment. There's only comment on those items. With regard to location, they have to be within the boundaries of the city, with a couple of exceptions. I would assume that all of the commissioners' meetings would be within the city. Teleconferencing is a viable option if certain requirements are complied with. The council had a special meeting at the beginning of this month in which Councilmember Clapp participated by phone. It is used with some regularity. To participate, any commissioner could, with staff, with enough notice, participate in a commission meeting by phone as well. And the requirements are that the agenda be posted at the door of the place in which you're participating by phone from. So it bars participating in a car. It comes up once a quarter. I get that call. So I'll note that now. You have to be in a fixed location, and that location has to be open to the public. Sorry, bug. Such that the public can come and participate in the meeting from the remote location. And the agenda must note where that remote location is. So that's the notice to staff. It has to be on the agenda, whether it's 72 or 24 hours ahead for that meeting. All votes are by roll call, and at least a quorum is inside the city. And so if any commissioner is traveling, for example, and still wants to participate in a critical meeting, that is an option, to participate by phone, with enough notice to staff to jump through those hoops. Exceptions. Individual contacts. Two speaking with each other, or in this case, because we have 7 members of the commission, 3 members speaking is less than a quorum. So 3 members can speak together on anything, and that's fine. Attending a conference, a league conference, or the Planning Commission Academy is not a meeting, even though you're all there discussing these issues, because you're not making decisions on particular items. A broader community meeting, or if the full commission attended another meeting, i.e. when we have the joint meetings, those are noticed for both. But even if we didn't have a joint meeting, if 4 commissioners wanted to attend a city council meeting, that's fine, because that meeting is itself a Brown Act meeting. The council meetings are noticed and open to the public. And then if there's a social ceremonial occasion.
A question for you, Matt.
Sure.
That I've been waiting for this. So there was an issue a few months back where I was on the front page of the paper for my attendance. Mayor Blatt was trying to work something out on the next upcoming agenda, and one of the council members responded to everybody on the city council with the caveat for informational purposes only. And I was like, how the heck are these city council people emailing back and forth with everybody on the contacts? I mean, is it just because they put for informational purposes only up there, and therefore they can do it?
I must confess, I'm not directly familiar with the facts of that situation. My sense is that it would fall under the rule that it fall under the point that a statement by one member to the others, if there is no responses, wouldn't qualify as a meeting. But I would, in general, caution that that approach is somewhat risky, because sending an email like that to the whole body invites folks to reply. Hence the statement, for informational purposes only, is an indication to the other members of the body that they shouldn't reply to create a meeting. Be very cautious in sending emails to the whole body.
Okay, because I've sat through these meetings going, I mean, even when we were down to 3, I couldn't call Darwin and go, hey, is the city doing anything?
Well, you can always call one, that's fine.
No, I couldn't, because there were only 3 of us.
Oh, well, yeah, when you're down to 3, two is a majority, right. That's,
Anything that might be close to,
no, that's right. When you're down to 3 members of a board, 2 is a majority.
yeah, and I think maybe it was, Chairman Vogt had sent me an email on the agenda item we were gonna talk about that afternoon, and all of a sudden.
Oh, right, that's when we had,
We could,
yeah.
We had this, and all of a sudden Commissioner Roney, Brian, resigned. I'm like, wait a second, I can't talk to anybody to even say, what the heck are we doing today?
Right, and that's the challenge of having
In fact, I called Rhonda and said, Rhonda,
3 members
can
only.
I talk to anybody other than you? So,
And to avoid that problem is why commissions are always at least 5 members, because then you can always at least talk to one other person to get on the same page.
yeah. I
When it
agree
drops
with
down to
the
3,
reference,
it's,
but, you know, I just, taking that against the brief communication that went on regarding, again, Mayor Blatt's trying to reschedule, basically to say, hey, we need to get our information together, so let's talk about this later, which was a reasonable request, but another council person took exception to that with a for informational purposes only header on it. So I was like, what?
right, and it also picks up the point that the Brown Act does take into account the realization that to some extent life is done in email now, which means within caution about a discussion about what's to be on the agenda. If it's limited to, are we having it tonight or tomorrow night? Are we having it this week or next week? That speaks to that type of email. If it's among a majority of the body, is okay. But again, it's about what are you discussing having the item on the agenda versus are you discussing timing? Having an item on the agenda or not. If it's not on the agenda, don't have that discussion by email, because that's about whether or not you're going to hear the item.
Okay, is there a secret handshake? I don't know that's legitimate.
Yeah, and that's where it's about be very cautious in using email versus for example, if the body has decided we're going to have the discussion about the Smith property, we're going to have that discussion, and then you can have an email about when you're going to time it.
Nobody was making.
Right, yeah.
I just was shocked to see an email that had all 5 council people on it. Since I.
Well,
Right, and in general, one should be cautious in emailing all of the body, and that's also speaks to the for information only point, that a one-way communication of, hey, look at this, let's talk about it at the next meeting, versus a long missive. Further questions?
May I interject for just a second? I've been puzzling with the Brown Act in that regard, and I've concluded I'm perfectly free to send emails to fellow commissioners if it isn't in and of itself a violation of the Brown Act. Now, as Mr. Summers has suggested, it may lead to a violation. But I propose in the future to simply say, don't respond and don't communicate it with anyone else on the subject. And then my communication, whatever I say in it, is not a meeting. Would you agree with me in that regard?
If all are careful to not respond and careful to then A, not respond, and B, not have a discussion with someone else about your email.
Right.
Or in this case, with 2 other people about your email, because 3 is okay, 4 is not.
Well, I don't think it has anything to do whatsoever with numbers.
No, it does. The
Why?
question of a meeting or not is a quorum, a majority of the body. 3 members can sit in a coffee shop and discuss things at will. 4 cannot. So if you send an email to one commissioner,
Can't get to the proposition of discussion unless there's a meeting.
recall,
There can't be a meeting.
Hey, Matt, make sure that the mics are on.
oh, thank
I
you.
got mine on, I
Good
think.
point, thank you.
Recall this slide. Here is a meeting.
Sure. It's a proper meeting, too.
Well, that's my point. A meeting has to be open in public unless the closed session exception applies.
Okay, what I'm saying is when I send out the email, it's not a meeting.
The other commissioners are hearing what you're saying.
No, I say when I send out the email, it isn't an improper meeting under the Brown Act, because nothing in the Brown Act says that it is.
As long,
Let's continue, we can go on forever on this, I suspect, and
you may have a different reading of the Brown Act than I have.
we'll discuss it, and I will be subject to sensible opinions you might give in that regard.
And always, the key is to always be cautious.
No,
It
I
goes
don't
back to
agree
that
with-
front page
I
point.
don't agree with you in that regard. This is democratic process. Part of the democratic process is communication.
Open-
Certain communications are improper. Others are perfectly proper and advance the democratic goals of this organization. You know, I don't like being closed down improperly. And I think where you say, be cautious, because you may inadvertently fall into something that's in violation of the act, is not good advice. I am perfectly willing, you know, I'm the one who's sanctioned if I violate the rule. And so I'll take the sanction if I'm wrong.
I'll point you to this slide, the beginning of the Brown Act. The purpose is to ensure that the public's business is conducted in open session. It's not about shutting down the democratic process. It's about ensuring that the democratic process is visible to the public.
Agreed, but
Email is not visible to the
is
public.
meeting. I don't think sending an email is a meeting. You have to get past that point. Look, as I said, we're wasting other people's time here. Let's go forward.
Is a meeting something that you agree to ahead of time, or is it impromptu if you send an email?
The meeting definition turns on whether or not you have a majority of a body discussing, hearing, and deliberating on items before the public's business. As we've noted, sending an email with an informational point, if there are no responses and there's no further discussion of that email among any other commissioners, more than four or more, that is not a meeting. But my reason I provide the caution is because extensive emails among the commissioners tends, in my experience, to lead to conversations among other commissioners about those emails. You end up with a meeting, or it tends to lead to replies and communications through email, which tends to lead to meetings. I offer that as a caution. And my caution is, again, based on, I don't intend to shut down the democratic process. The point is that the public has the right to see what happens. The public has the right to see how their business is conducted, unless a closed session exemption applies. And I
So I
think,
guess an email is different from a phone conversation, because an email can be forwarded, a phone conversation cannot.
that is correct. Good point, yeah. And this, I think, gets to part of this point. Serial meetings is a prohibited type of meeting. If you have A and B speak, and then B speaks to C, and then C speaks to D, that's now 4 discussing the same thing. Because each time, and that is true if that is a prohibited meeting, serial meeting, if each time each commissioner communicates the previous views. In other words, if A sits down with B and they say, well, are we going to vote no or yes? And they decide, we'll vote yes. And then B goes talks to C. Well, I know A is going to vote yes. Are you going to vote yes? And then C says, yeah, I'll vote yes. And then C goes to D. Well, I know A, B, and C are voting yes. Are you going to vote yes? And D says, yeah, I'm going to vote yes. Now that's 4 who've all discussed each other's opinions. And it doesn't matter that the first person, A, hasn't heard yet what C and D are doing. D has heard what has heard a majority are up to. And that's where you get a problematic serial meeting. The same thing works through hub and spoke as opposed to a daisy chain. A calls B, then calls C, then calls D. That's a prohibited meeting. Because again, A now is now collected information regarding the opinion of a majority of a quorum, of opinion of a majority of the body. This can happen with an employee, with a staff member, or with a developer or an applicant. The applicant calls up the commission and says, hey, do you have any questions about my project? That's ex parte contact. It's fine if it's disclosed at the hearing. Then they then say, well, how are you going to vote? Don't answer the question if they ask you that. But if unfortunately the question is answered, I think you're fine, I'll vote for it. And then they start calling the others. Now they've collectively, and each time they say what they've heard. Most applicants are smart enough not to do that. And if you have an applicant who's doing that, shut it down. But that would become a prohibited hub and spoke, the email point we've talked about, or serial briefings can be a problem. Staff can provide a briefing to 3 or fewer commissioners on any given issue, or have a meeting regarding any given issue. But if in those meetings they communicate what the other members think, that becomes the problem. Staff becomes the intermediary at that case. So the key there is to not communicate the information that the other commissioners have said, but give the same briefing to everybody. Public comment. Every meeting must allow public comment opportunity. Again, with the caveat that regular meetings have the general public comment, special meetings have only public comment on those items on the agenda. The chair is always reasonable in allowing the time limits on public comment and enforcing comment. Discussion of off-agenda items, a minefield area. Commissioners can briefly respond to comments or questions raised by a public commenter, or can briefly respond to comments or questions from each other. The classic example is at a council meeting, as you're all aware. John Q. Public says, we need to do something about the raccoons on Main Street. The council says, staff, do something about the raccoons on Main Street. The raccoons on Main Street aren't on the agenda, but the council can speak, and even 2 or 3 of them could all say, staff, do something about it, because it's a brief comment directing staff to go do something. If you'd like to have a more formal discussion on something, and this comes up at the end of every meeting, you offer the opportunity to provide commission comments. And this is the opportunity for you to raise something you'd like to see come on a future agenda. And the other commissioners could say, yeah, I'd like to have that come on the agenda, and then it would be brought back for you. There are 2 further exceptions for discussions of off-agenda items at which the council can take, or the council and commissions can take action. One is if there is a true emergency, a flood, a fire, a strike, or if there is an immediate need for action that arose after the agenda was posted and will resolve before the next regular meeting, and that requires a 4/5 vote to hear the item and then an X vote on the item. The classic example is federal grant program was just released yesterday, 2-day application period. We need to apply now to get some money, and we can't wait because the application period closes. It doesn't work if staff sat on the item, and it doesn't work if there's not an immediate need. Closed sessions, limited topics. They're normally limited to the legislative body, so we don't often take commissions in the closed session. It is not impossible, though. It can occur if you have a matter of significant litigation risk, and it'd be beneficial to brief the commission before acting on an item. Closed sessions require a particular format for the agenda, and that a specific exception be applicable. You can't just go in closed session whenever you'd like to. We have to find a particular exception that works. And closed sessions should never be gone into without an attorney's advice and often presence. And if we do ever take the commission to closed session, anything stated in closed session is bound under the Brown Act to remain confidential. It may also be bound by attorney-client privilege or any other privilege, which would require both that staff not release information and that the commission keep the information to themselves. Dealing with the public. The public has a right to comment. They have a right to photograph. They have a right to video meetings. They have a right to attend. We can impose reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on the public's photographing or videography of a meeting. This often comes up if we ever have a news crew come. They're allowed to come and they're allowed to film, but we can say, for example, if they want to put up glaring lights, we can say those lights are unreasonable. Enforcement for the Brown Act. Court of public opinion. The public is quite aware of the Brown Act's basic point that open meetings are to be open to public and will make a stink if the city violates it. There is also civil actions, criminal action if it's knowing and intentional violation. The Ventura County District Attorney is quite familiar with the Brown Act and is will enforce it when they are concerned that the Brown Act has been violated. They respond to public comments and they investigate any public complaint of a Brown Act violation. They'll investigate it. The city will get a letter and we'll have a response and there'll be a dialogue. And anytime anyone wants to bring a civil suit, you have to first serve a notice on the city seeking a cure. The city has a chance to cure the violation if it believes a violation occurred, and only if it does not cure it, then no civil suit can be brought. Brown Act, final points. The details are complicated, but the basic rule is simple. The public's business should be conducted in the public's eye, unless an exception applies. And with the notice and opportunity for the public to participate. As with all of these issues, when in doubt, ask for help. A few more points that are, I can do that. No, but I'm happy to do that. That might make sense. This is like 4 slides. Let me do that at the end. Yeah. The next ones are part of the general training, but may not be quite as relevant to the commission. Competitive bidding requirements. Anytime the city is doing a public works project over $5,000, it must be competitively bid. The trash cans that we saw were competitively bid as an example. And it applies to a public project, building a public work, structure a building, repairing or maintaining, with certain exceptions, a structure or a building, any kind of large public project where there's a physical outcome, requires public bidding, competitive bidding. There's exceptions if there's emergency. There's exceptions for professional services or special services. Classic example would be getting an engineer's advice or a historic preservation consultant. That would not need to be competitively bid, but it could always be done so. If on receipt of the bids are not to the council's satisfaction with regard to the bid items, or if the bids are all too high or unreasonable, the council can reject all bids and still proceed with the project by a 4/5 vote using day labor, the city staff, or another purchase of supplies and materials. Anytime we're going to engage in contracts, it's important to evaluate whether public bidding requirements apply, and if so, are they being complied with. The same thing is true with prevailing wages laws. As you may be aware, careful. Anytime the city is purchasing services for more than $1,000, pardon me, not services, is purchasing a public work for more than $1,000, it must pay prevailing wages on that work. It applies with some exceptions to structures or physical things that the city's buying or building. And prevailing wages tend to be higher than the average wage for the area. That's another one with a number of exceptions. A contract bid in violation of a cleanly applicable competitive bidding rule is void and illegal, and there's no way for the city to ratify it. You have to do it again with full bidding processes. And the city gets to keep whatever the contractor should paid for. A couple points on ethical decision-making. Let's bring up your point. A quote here: whenever two good people argue over principles, they are both right. And it's a matter of, as you're going through these decisions, think through, is what's being proposed legal? Does it comport with your sense of right and wrong? Is it a good public policy? Is it consistent with the city's values as expressed in the general plan, as expressed in your knowledge of the public's values? Is it consistent with the Ojai Municipal Code and applicable state laws and federal laws? The golden rule is a good one to keep in mind as well. These are ethical decision-making points. Here I'll also speak to ex parte communications and site visits, as that often comes up for the commission. And I don't have a slide on that one. It's just a further oral comment. Having a communication with an applicant outside of a public meeting, an ex parte communication apart, is legal, as long as the ex parte communication is disclosed at the time you have the hearing. So if you have a communication with an applicant, disclose that you had that communication, and every agenda has a line item for disclosure of site visits and ex parte communications. And in that disclosure, disclose both who you spoke to and a brief synopsis of the subject of the conversation. The reason to do this is to ensure that the public is aware of what you're making your decision based on. You're presumed to make your decision based on the record, which is the staff report, the agenda, the comments at the hearing, all of the materials that come with the staff report. And if you're making a decision based on something you learned in a conversation with the applicant, unless that's disclosed, the public would not be aware of that. So they wouldn't be aware of the basis on which you made your decision. It also helps me if I ever have to defend the commission or council's decision on a land use matter, because I can produce a full record including what that statement was. Same thing is true for site visits. Site visits are legal. If the site visit includes an ex parte communication, disclose it as such. If you just go and walk down the street and look at the site, disclose that as well. And if you're in the course of a site visit, my recommendation is to not generate independent physical evidence. In other words, don't break out a tape measure and a ruler and a pad and start measuring wall heights for yourself. Ask staff to do that so the information can be presented to the entire commission at once. That kind of independent research is problematic if you're creating information that isn't in the record and that wasn't available to the applicant or the public or the whole commission. But a site visit to get a general sense of a site, its aesthetics, where it is, its location, its how it fits in with the neighborhood, how it fits in with the community, that's fine. Problems arise for litigation risk when a commissioner generates independent evidence. And if you are going to do that kind of outside research, at a minimum, I don't recommend it, but at a minimum, provide the copies of everything to the full commission, and a copy for the public and the applicant, so that all in the room understand what you're making your decision based on. And staff, yes. And I've got, let's see, 2 more slides. Don't be afraid to invite ethics into the room. And don't be afraid to invite ethics into the room. In other words, always have your ethical decision-making hat on.
I didn't hear you.
No worries. Always have your ethical decision-making hat on when you're making a decision. And there's often more than one right answer. And it's reasonable to disagree, as we've seen tonight. It's always reasonable to disagree on issues, and as we'll see over time. The trick is to maintain a sense of decorum and a sense of reasonable disagreement, focused in policies, rooted in principles, as opposed to personal attacks or other kinds of unreasonable disputes. And the city has, to that effect, a commission handbook, which I had a copy of around here somewhere. Where did I put it? Oh, here it is. Here it is. The City of Ojai Board and Commissioner Handbook, adopted, I believe, in 2012 and updated in 2014. And it reviews a lot of these, and it speaks to, as I recall, a sense of decorum and courtesy. Bear that in mind and review it at your leisure. I believe you're all given a copy of it. In addition, I sent around my firm's supplemental Commissioner Handbook. And to answer Mr. Vogel's coming question, the city's handbook was formally adopted by the council. That controls. My handbook that I sent around as well is a compilation of my advice. It's legal advice. It's not holy writ. And if anyone didn't get a copy, I'll send that around further. Akins and McCready. All right. Did you not get one, Isaiah? Oh, okay. I don't have a paper copy with me, but I will work with staff to get paper copies made. Paper copies. And Kathy was kind enough to give me the quorum page from page 17 of the city's commission handbook. Commissioners should conduct themselves in an orderly, business-like manner to ensure that the business of the city is attended to efficiently and thoroughly, and to ensure that the integrity of the deliberative process of the commission is maintained at all times. Another point to bear in mind. And in terms of further resources, the California Institute for Local Government at that web address in your slides is a great resource on ethical decision making and on these broader conflict of interest questions. The Institute for Local Government is a body of the League of California Cities, and the League of Cities website, cacities.org, also has a huge wealth of resources on city government, conflicts of interest issues, commissioner issues, land use issues. A variety of great resources are available. Last thing is another quote. Management is doing things right, leadership is doing the right things. And that is the conclusion of the formal presentation. I'm happy to take any and all questions. Thank you for listening, and I hope we hit.
Thank you, Mr. Summers.
We hit our 2 hours worth of training, so you're complete for 2 years.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Summers before we close this portion?
And I have actually one more thing to note.
I should note that I disagree on certain of the things that Mr. Summers has raised, and we're on an ongoing discussion on the matter.
Very well. With that, I'll invite Director Wald to fill us in on future agenda items.
The last thing I want to do.
Huh? Oh, he just wants to,
I'm sorry?
he has a housekeeping item for you.
Oh,
One
go ahead.
housekeeping item. I have a little sign-in sheet that I'll pass around if you could sign in. We keep records so that if you ever have to prove you took the training, we can prove it. And don't leave before I have a chance to hand you a certificate of completion as well. Again, you can keep for your records.
Thank you.
In order to prove that you met your AB 1234 training requirement.
It's like jury service. You gotta
Thank
have
you.
proof, you know.
Thank you.
All right.
Director Wald?
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry.
Oh, you have a question?
I was just going to ask, Matt, while you're passing that sheet around, I would hope that you had a clause in your presentation where you're talking about the right to prepare. I would hope that our commission be given that same right to prepare. We were not given that right at the time of the Libby, of the Ojai Valley Inn preparation for a counter to their arguments. And we didn't get the 10 days.
Thank you.
Staff will always bear in mind ensuring that the commission has adequate time to consider items. There's no legal requirement that the commission be given 10 days to sit with material from the applicant, unfortunately. We try to ensure that the commission has time to consider items subject to the Permanent Streamlining Act, which governs how the timeline we have to act on applications. But the point is understood.
Right.
Director Wald?
Thank you. Okay, so moving on, we want to talk about future agenda items, and so I just wanted to kind of like spread my notes all over here. So I looked on the internet with my phone here. I don't know exactly everything that you're referring to on the February item, but I will tell you what we have. We did put out the RFP that you're all working on this particular city hall and the Chaparral High School. We did hold interviews with the people who submitted those due to the fact normally we would have come here and presented that, but due to the lack of quorum, trying to move things forward. So Matt Winiger can come before you in your meeting in May with who submitted proposals to the RFP and what the outcome of those interviews that we had with the people who proposed. So that would be one item we would be taking in May. The second one would be we have a concept review application that's been sitting waiting for us to have a quorum, and that's for 1010 Foothill. And that would be one of the properties of the Libby House, not 1,000, but 1010. And that proposal is for additional home, separate lot, but I believe still under the same Landmark Mills Act. So that will be coming for you for a concept review, and that is, again, Mr. Shimsheri. And then I think we're still working on the Taramina Historic District application that we had talked about previously before all of this took place, with such a large gap in our meetings. And so, again, then, as Mr. Summers indicated earlier this evening, we are going to bring back before you the ad hocs group's recommendation to amendments to the municipal code, specifically culminating out of the issue with the NEF, weaknesses in the ordinance that you were, I think we had a joint meeting at one time with City Council, and they directed that that was something that you could do. We are going to be bringing that forward, and, probably with a couple of different recommendations, whether or not, how you want that, going point by point, what the recommendation from the ad hoc was, what staff's recommendation, whether we can support that recommendation, and what the outcome of that change in the ordinance would be, and, the indirect or direct changes in how the city conducts business based on those changes in ordinances. That describe it pretty well, Matt?
Yep.
And so we have a rather full plate for May, and I'm open to anything else that you think that we need to place on there.
So can you, for me, say that again about how we would proceed with reviewing the ad hoc's recommendations for the revisions to the landmarks? I mean, how could we do that in an efficient way? Because I can imagine, I've gone through the materials that we sent for the February meeting. I can imagine us being here all night. So how are we going to streamline that?
So Matt and I have talked about how to streamline it, and I think that, Matt, jump in anytime you want.
Yeah.
But I think that we're going to provide sort of a matrix. We're going to say what the original code stated, what the change is. This was presented by the ad hoc, and then staff, Matt and I, will give an opinion on whether or not we can support that, and what the outcome of that's going to be as far as is it in alignment with the direction City Council gave you? Because it's been a while since we had that direction from council, so we want to make sure that the intent, as Matt and I recall, and I think you can chime in, the idea was to amend specifically the ordinance to address where there were gaps in the ordinance that allowed things to go on, such as the NEF. And so there was kind of specific guidelines. So some things may have gone beyond that, and then in that case, Matt will give you his opinion about whether or not he feels that that's something that that staff can support on to City Council. And then so I think doing it in that format, and maybe doing it as a PowerPoint, we're up here where we can. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we'll try to have it structured so that we can have the paper document plus the paper document divided up in slides so that we can all look at the same, all be on the same electronic page. And the other element of the staff report that we plan on putting together is a sense of implications on some of the language changes proposed, what the implications that the commission should keep in mind as it makes its recommendation to council. And the overall goal, of course, is to make the ordinance
Clearer. Thank you.
What is the NEF you keep talking about?
F Lounge.
The Neff Lounge, landmark number 9, I believe. It's at the Ojai Valley Inn.
Oh, okay.
So I will just say that when we've done this before on, when I do this in Planning Commission, we have something that just seems like it's overwhelming to tackle. It's really important that we keep it, I know that at times, even tonight, probably is overwhelming, and you kind of get a little bit glassy-eyed. So we'll break it down to specific points that we can agree or disagree point by point, kind of move through it that way, rather than kind of give you it all and then ask you to discuss it. Yeah. So I think that works a little bit better if you're okay with that kind of structure.
No, I'm glad to hear that you've been thinking about some kind of framework that we can streamline it. So that's what was my interest. Commissioner Hill?
Yes, the committee that was examining the ordinances, we didn't finish. And it seems like there's a jump from where we left off to the fact that you're ready to present this to the whole commission. I'm the only member left of that group, and Craig is gone and Rose is gone, and it's been so long Now, since we last tackled it, when was our last meeting? In December, or
It was,
January, or way back?
No, before that.
My recollection, it was October.
October. So, I mean, this is, I don't want to lose anything out in this process. Is our bridge too far?
So we had concluded the ad hoc presentation. Matt had given the draft to all the ad hoc committee. We had presented some information already to this full commission. So where we were done, I mean, I can be corrected, but the way that Matt and it was presented, we did one meeting, I think it was in December. And so the idea was to present the ad hoc committee's draft report, which was a red line report that Matt had developed based on the ad hoc committee's recommendations, to the full commission, and then have the full commission decide whether the ad hoc needed to go back and do more work, whether the full commission was in agreement with the ad hoc's recommendations. So we were at that point where we needed to bring it to the entire commission. That's where we were, and we had begun that process.
When did the ad hoc committee sign off on it? I didn't sign off on it.
This document is dated November 23rd.
My understanding was that the ad hoc committee was ready for it to go to the commission, and that's why we had that meeting in December when the commission first considered it. And my recommendation would be that, in recognition of the fact that we Commissioners Walker and Boggs have retired from the commission, and they're leaving only Commissioner Hill, and we have 4 new commissioners, it would make sense to continue discussions at the full commission level. It would make sense, given that Commissioners Boggs and Walker have retired, leaving only Commissioner Hill as the commissioner from the ad hoc committee, and we have 4 new commissioners, it would make sense to have the discussion of the full commission.
May I suggest an alternative? That is to say, that the ad hoc committee be reconstituted and work through the materials until Commissioner Hill is satisfied that the committee has concluded its work, and then submit it?
See, I don't know if I'm satisfied at the moment, because I don't know what Matt's going to present.
So the red line version, the final version was given to all the sitting commissioners in December. I'd be happy to send that back out again if that's what or Matt could, if that's what you're asking for. But, we did have a conversation regarding this because, obviously a lot of time and expense,
Right.
From the city attorney, from staff, from all of you. We just didn't, we understand we're in a very peculiar position now with the majority of the commission, or the ad hoc committee, gone. We're trying to not then just start completely over again. If there are points of the ad hoc committee that we can all agree on, we're happy to move those points forward. I mean, if we can kind of whittle it down. And then if the commission, once they see that and they get to the point and they say, well, this is just not doable, there's just too many conflicts. If you want to set another ad hoc group again, I think that's doable, but I think we would really like all of you to kind of see where we are, and are we going down the right path or are we not? Because we need that redirection on whether or not the direction and the goals of the ordinance change are really the right direction that we should be going.
Commissioner Hill?
Well, I suppose that I could, at the next meeting when we're going to do this, I could strenuously object to the points where I didn't feel that we'd get to that conclusion.
Well, do you want to meet with him by himself? I mean, we're fine meeting with you.
We're happy perhaps to take a meeting with the 3 of us.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that.
And the same goes for any commissioner to talk through the points. I'm sure Kathy's happy to meet with any commissioner.
Okay.
The text that.
Thank you.
The text of the ordinance will be the same as was presented in December. Nothing will change on the text.
Nothing's changing.
You know, I might have been gone at that December
Oh,
meeting.
that's fair. That's fair. That may have been the case.
I don't know. I had to look at my records, but,
Is that acceptable, Chair, that we meet with Commissioner Hill and go over? And
Terrific,
That's a fine
as the
alternative.
last
Commissioner
of the
James?
Mohicans here.
Can you send us a copy of what you've already, are you going to be doing that anyway? Yeah, okay.
Do you want to send that out?
Yes.
Or have someone send it out?
Yes.
Yeah. Your staff will send that out.
Yes, I mean, that's one of those things that since we're at this point, we've got a red line, we're fine to send it out way in advance. You know, as we know, we get a lot of things. I mean, I've already just went through a number of things we're going to have in May. So we'd want you guys to have plenty of time to look at it. We don't want you to feel pressured. So we're fine to get that out early.
Commissioner Quinn?
Well, and for me, not just that item, but I feel at a disadvantage for the other items that were on the agenda for February that I've not had the opportunity to look at. So are those items available to me also?
I haven't no, they're not, because the agenda for February says canceled. I just checked why we had the meeting. I don't think that actually the agenda ever, I don't think the agenda was ever posted to the public because we got the.
February meeting?
Yeah, it's not on the
It was
website.
definitely posted to the public,
Yeah.
because we got taken apart at the front page of the Ojai Valley News.
Oh, I don't know. I tried to pull it up when we were sitting here and I couldn't get it to come up. So can you please, Chair McCready, explain to me what other items were on there? Or provide that for me?
Yes, I can provide that for you.
May I suggest another agenda item?
Yes.
I went to considerable effort puzzling out the proposed revisions to the code and wrote a long document on that subject, which I think quite properly might be considered by the commission concurrently with the proposed amendments. Or alternatively, if they're going to do it in bits and pieces, I'll raise my objections in bits and pieces, but on the basis that I can send it out to the commission beforehand, because they're quite complex and we waste a lot of time if I have to explain it at the meeting.
Mr. Summers?
I believe I've received this email before, back in December. Sending that explanation to the whole commission with a copy to staff so it can be made available to the public as part of the public packet, I think that's fine. The key being that it's made available to the public. Would there be an objection to it being made public?
No, I have no problem with that at all. I suppose, however, that you at some point in time have to make a determination if you want this issue on the agenda or not.
Yes. I'm just wondering if Commissioner Vogel's comments are best addressed when we do our May review of.
It's going to be a long, I
We've got to push the
got
ball forward.
your letter too. And I think, and remembering those, the commentary that you wrote, if you have a long presentation and Commissioner Vogt's alternative direction, we might be here forever. Yeah.
Maybe,
They had, in fact,
maybe just
some of the
Jim
matters
May,
that I covered in the
June.
letter had already been
Well,
decided by the
I mean, I
commission.
don't see what's
Yeah.
going- I mean, I know, yeah.
Nothing's been decided by the commission in terms of the revision. It's all still in discussion. There's no decisions yet.
Right.
In other words, the draft was prepared for discussion purposes. It's not a final.
That's correct.
Nothing's decided. It's a draft for discussion, all open to further discussion and further comments.
That's correct.
I might
So
offer a
I think somehow they need to be together. Otherwise,
Right, no,
your
the-
presentation and the commissioner's comments, among which would be Commissioner Vogel's.
Right, certainly, and the commission will consider them all together.
I think that's how we have to do it.
Certainly.
Well, I think that, too, you have to remember that while the chair, two members of the committee are now gone, getting the words on paper in a draft ordinance amendment is just words. The ad hoc committee would have an opportunity, as we're presenting this, to explain why they did what they did. I mean, that's the whole point of having the ad hoc committee, whatever members left, talking to the commission and explaining to the commission, we wanted this because of this. And if there's different language or different, the goal, it's an ordinance written with specific goals from the ad hoc group. Okay, so we were presenting it the first time as a workshop. It is a working document. That's where we are right now. And the idea was, here's a group of your commission you tasked with doing this. They were going to come back. Staff was just going to be staff presenting. They were going to explain why they chose what they did. And then you would agree or disagree. We would go back, make changes, provided all of that stayed under the umbrella that council directed you with the goals you had and why you were tasked with changing the ordinance. That's all staff is here to do, is keep you under that umbrella. Matt's here to provide that you do things that are legal, and then we're just a conduit for the work that you're doing. So that's really where we are. I just want to explain that this is nowhere near anything that's going up to council at this point. We are here to make sure the whole commission here's what the ad hoc committee was doing, and then we go point by point and they would have the opportunity to explain, and provided maybe Matt would explain why he made changes, because that's why Matt was there, was to make sure the ideas that formulated out of the ad hoc group were then put in a way that was legally defensible. Correct, Matt?
That's my understanding of our situation as well.
Yes.
Yeah, Kathy and I are here to serve as drafters and scriveners, and to provide commentary on points for your consideration. The decision is yours, not ours. And then yours is a recommendation to council, who has the final choice.
Thank you.
So with that said, are we good with bringing in the informational items of the RFP? We really need to move that forward. We did put that out. RFP, request for proposals for a Phase 1 historic report for both the high school chaparral and for this building. We did put that out. That happened before we had this break in continuity. We've had professionals waiting to get going on that, so we want to just kind of follow up. So we're going to do the RFP, we're going to do the concept review for 10 Foothill, and then we have those items first, and then work on the ordinance.
Could I receive
Mr. Vogt, could you
materials so I can get up to speed quickly?
Could you scoot up to the microphone? Sorry. I'm hearing from the microphone from Stephanie that you're not being caught.
Apologize. Could you provide me with a copy of those materials so I can get up to speed on chaparral and all the rest of it?
Yes, I will provide the materials that went to the.
None of this happens.
Well, there's a certain, correct, but I can give them the past information regarding how council authorized you to go out for RFP, the links to the meetings. They can watch those meetings of how you decided which two items to choose. They can, what we call, rehabilitate themselves to be at the same level as you are, and then we'll present the RFP, correct? And
May I ask a preliminary question? That
Yes.
is to say, is the city, or the Board of Education, which is, I guess, the owner of the Chaparral School, applied under Chapter 8 that the school be designated as a landmark?
The school has not applied for a landmark designation by the city.
But we're not doing that.
And the reason that the Phase 1 Historic Preservation Report is being completed is not to enable the Historic Preservation Commission in the city to understand the historic characteristics of the school, not necessarily in order to landmark it. That the question of landmarking the school is a decision yet to be made.
That's correct.
Okay, I'd like to see those materials.
Any other commissioner comments or questions? Commissioner Hill?
Yes. In one of the last meetings that I was in attendance, we were entertained by a preliminary concept review of 700 San Antonio Road, the Fairburn Estate. And that's been so long ago, I was expecting to see a concept review roll before us in that long period of time that we've been off. What's happened on that property?
Do you want to move off of future agendas onto my planning report?
Oh, yeah, is that,
Yes.
I mean, because I want to stay true, we just had this training, I want to stay true to what's been agendized, okay?
Yes.
So, my planning.
We will now move on to
Okay,
planning
planning
report.
report. Receive a verbal report from staff on current planning activities that potentially involve historic preservation. Well, on my list to present to you tonight orally is this, so 700 San Antonio. I have, he withdrew his application to do anything with that property. He was a little bit upset with the city's having, I don't want to speak for him. So I called him and explained to him that he's not a landmark property, and that it was a courtesy. He was asked, as you know, staff presented it as a courtesy to come before you. His architect had indicated that he wanted to do it. We certainly didn't require him to do it, but it was off-putting to him. I guess I can say it in that. And so I reached out and I told him that, you know, we would really like him to continue whatever work he's doing, and that we thought we could work with him. I haven't heard from him, but he completely withdrew his application. Was just felt that
he withdrew it?
Doesn't want to go through with any of the changes he's doing. He's just
Sell it too? Did he sell it?
no, no, he was fine after I spoke with him. You know, he's still going to have consideration taken under advisement, but he just you know, as you heard when he was here, he's done a lot of work and is very experienced, and
So this isn't an existing?
it's not an existing landmark, no. So that's where we are with that one. And
Can I comment on that? It certainly should be a landmark, and we should try to encourage them in any way that we can to seek that status.
I agree. That's why I called him when I heard he withdrew. I told him that we were very excited to hear his expertise. I thought we all were. You know, he was kind of fascinating in his presentation and all the work he'd done around the United States. So I think we'd be very excited to hear from him again. And I told him, you know, the commission will be a different commission, different people. We'd like to hear from him. So, you know, maybe he's watching tonight, and maybe he'll come forward.
The fact that that property at 700 San Antonio is a clone of two other houses that are identical to it, that are both state landmarks in their respective states, should cause Ojai to certainly try to do the best we can as far as convincing him to have it
Yes,
a local landmark.
I think that's true.
To say
So I also want to move on. Oh, I'm sorry.
about San Antonio.
Commissioner Convery?
Thank you. About the withdrawing of the proposal, and I don't know the man, I haven't had any conversations with him, but there is a general feeling in town about how difficult it is to get anything done for many reasons. And I think that has to do with people not wanting to come forward for landmark status and for Mills Act, which is a big concern to me. I have a neighbor who's going through the second unit compliance issue, and it's been incredibly difficult. They were told, this was the quote that the building inspector, he repeated to me, I feel comfortable saying it in here. The building inspector told this couple, if you don't do what we ask, we'll come after you. Those were the words, we'll come after you. And I think when you're in an environment where people are using that kind of language toward others who are trying to create a process, it's off-putting to people coming forward. And so I think that's a bigger picture, but it's something for the commission to think about addressing that type of language and presentation just in the city in general. I think we'll have a much better response toward residents seeking landmark status.
Well, I think, just to let you know, I think in his particular case, he was rather frank about the landmark process, or the process coming before HPC being overbearing. He wasn't speaking, and I mean, I spoke with him directly. It wasn't regarding staff. It was just what happened that night at the meeting.
Yeah,
like
it can be. I mean, I had a house landmarked, I haven't had a Mills Act home, and I've been through this before, and when I went through it 12 or 13 years ago, it was pretty straightforward. It wasn't overbearing at all. In fact, I had to beg everybody to finally pay attention. So it was a very different story. But I do think there's a sensibility in town, and whether I'm using the
Okay.
correct words, landmark status or historical Mills Act, whatever it is,
We'll
it's
take-
just the sensibility.
We'll take that. We need to stay on track here, because Commissioner comments is next, if you're,
No, I have a couple more things.
okay.
I have
and then we
one
can
real
go
quick
back.
comment as well, if I could jump right in here.
Mr. Summers?
Thank you, Chair McCready. Commissioner Convery, if you haven't already done so, you might invite your neighbor to make a complaint. That the comment's certainly concerning. You might invite your neighbor to speak to the community development director or the city manager about that concern.
Thank you.
Director Wald?
So the other thing, I'm sorry, so my mind, we were going, I'm sorry, long on this. 334 East Ojai, that was the other thing we wanted to come in May. That's something we've been working on. That went before City Council. That's the old Thomas Aquinas thrift store. And while it isn't landmarked, and it isn't, we have a historic report, and it's not qualifying for landmark status, it is at the view shed, so to speak, of the arcade. We have taken that project for a concept review to PC, and they did comment on it, and we indicated to them that they needed to go before the HPC. Again, in this particular case, because it is in the view shed of the arcade, we want to make sure that in this particular case, because they're asking the city to do a land swap, so the city will be actually part of the application, we'll be an applicant with them, that all of the city boards and commissions that might be affected by this project have weighed in. So they will be bringing that forward too. They've changed their project a little bit in response to the comments they've gotten back from PC, but they'll be coming forward to you also. So that is also something that we're working on that has to do with a historic building. Also, I will say that back in December, we received a preliminary building permit application for work to be performed on the, I'm sorry, what was it, 701 Foothill? Is that what you were saying earlier?
That's 701.
What is it?
That's mine.
That's you, sorry. The one that's right next to you. The one we talked about earlier.
718.
718, thank you. 718.
Old house.
Yes, your old home. And we have indicated to them that they needed to come before the HPC on those issues on that particular home, and they have placed that on hold. And so that has been in the office on hold per the request of the contractor, but there was a general rehabilitation of that house having to do with electric. I mean, many of the things are repair and maintenance, which don't qualify for a work permit, but there were a few. There was one or two that did trigger it, and it's electrical, plumbing, I mean, a wholesale overhaul of utilities and appliances in that house. So I just want to keep you apprised of what's going on with things. And to my recollection, that's about the extent of what we're doing with that. And if you have any questions about anything else you've heard about in the community as far as applications in historic or near historic, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. With that, I'll open the commissioner comments period. If there are any commissioner wishes to speak or comment or have any questions. Commissioner Convery.
I have a question for Commissioners Hill, Akins, and McCready. And this is my first meeting here, so I was kind of baffled that the Public Works Department can go out and and I may be wrong, I don't know how the process happened because they did it before, but they bought the trash cans or decided which trash cans are the design, and then they presented it here as a courtesy. That was my understanding of what happened tonight. But when something is put in the arcade, the HPC always reviews the banners, approves the signs, I mean, everything in the arcade, and yet this separate city department was able to pick the design, and I don't understand that.
I think that, again, it is a function of the gap in our meetings, and I think they probably would have come to us sooner had that happened. Am I incorrect on that?
But would they have come sooner as a courtesy or to, I think,
Yeah, I
it
think
seems
that-
like the HPC should have chosen the design of the trash cans in the arcade, just like the signs, just like the banners, just like the benches.
So if I might, I think that this speaks to why the work on the ordinance update is so important. There isn't, you're identifying a gap in the city's regulations. We have argued and had lively discussions over what needs a work permit and what doesn't. And it has words, and we can get in kind of the weeds with those words. But what the ad hoc committee has done and what Matt has worked on doing is actually developing regulations that fill this gap on things that you should be allowed to have a voice on. You should be the one that's making decisions. That really goes beyond this sort of wordsmithing of because the code really only speaks to kind of like construction and structures. And so that's why we have been trying to move forward this ordinance change.
Well,
So-
it's not a permit issue. You don't need a permit, I don't think,
Right.
to put a trash can, but just like the signs that get approved. Everything in the arcade is approved.
Right, so the signs are required to have a sign permit, and the ordinance specifically says those signs go to you. There isn't anything that says ancillary, street furniture, and so let me just speak to the whole thing. Often, the Public Works Director comes through things, and they're sort of, he's got a grant, that's what I heard today, correct? Oh, I am. Well, you want to speak to it? That's fine. I'm just trying to say that often there is time constraints on how money needs to be spent. I don't know in this particular case, he says it was money from the 89, I wrote it down. And so we've tried to bring those things as fast as we can because, he asked to get on the agenda months ago. We put him on. He was driving back tonight, and he said, I don't think I'm going to make it. And I said, well, I'll hold it till you get here. We are trying to move these things as fast as we can, but sometimes there are timeframes that he has to meet in order to get, to spend the funds or get grant money. So I don't know the specifics of it. I don't know because I find out when he tells me. I'm not privy to that. But we did try to bring this as soon as we could for him. We try to accommodate all those things and to you also. And he was well aware he needed to come, and it was at his request.
Thanks.
Let me comment further.
Commissioner Vogt?
I've been looking at Chapter 10 since. I'm becoming more convinced, I'm not absolutely convinced yet, that trash can is a structure under this code. As it says here, a structure means anything constructed or erected, the use of which requires permanent or temporary location on or in the ground.
It's not in the ground, it's not attached.
It's on it.
Comments?
I'm on the ground, and I'm
Okay.
not a structure. It's not
Well-
attached. That would make the
Mr.
dog a
Summers?
structure.
Were you gonna-
All I would say is that I think this further reiterates the point that the ordinance is ripe for some reevaluation and some reconsideration of these identified gaps to resolve them. As noted, this staff's assessment is that the trash cans do not require a permit, hence they're going forward. And they all note the council approved them as well, both the money and the design. But this is an example of a gap, and that's where it highlights the need to sit down with the full set of commission and the new commissioners and look at the ordinance in detail and keep these situations in mind as you're evaluating the text revisions.
Commissioner Quinn?
I would just like to add that I've landmarked 2 houses, one under your auspices and one a few years ago. And if something like a trash can were to be considered as something that the commission would approve, I certainly wouldn't have done that. I think you had mentioned lawn furniture. If the commission is going to come and say what lawn furniture I can put and so on, you agree to landmark, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because if it applies to the arcade, it has to apply to all of the other landmark properties. So there is a benefit to me to have landmarked them and gone through the Mills Act, but there's a point at which I, and probably a whole lot of other people, would say enough. It's not that big of a benefit. So I think there has to be some discretion to allow some personalization, some thing, and the state act definitely states that it's only and of course the arcade is viewed from the street, but it's only the things that are visible from the street. So even if you have a landmark property, according to the state guidelines, you could have a swimming pool and other things in your backyard if they're not visible to the streets. But when I brought that up here, then that was really pretty much not in this city, So I just think that what you're saying is that we do need to have more of an understanding of what it is that when I come to you, am is being required of me, and also what we as a commission are wanting to have control over. And so I think we're heading in the right direction for that. And that's actually one of the reasons that I wanted to be on the commission.
And I agree with
Thank
both
you.
of you, but the problem isn't gaps, it's over-regulation, and that's what we should be correcting.
Thank you. Are there other commissioner comments for the evening? Mayor Blatz? Thank you for staying with us tonight.
I want to thank you. You're the ones that really sat through this and deliberated on a number of important issues. Although it was probably the longest meeting of a commission that I've been at for a long time that actually made no decisions. But that's all right. I mean, the whole idea of the training for elected officials and appointed officials is very important, and I think it was good that just by happenstance, because of all the new commissioners, it was done on the very first night you were here. Sometimes you'll sit on a commission for 6 months before you have the training, so I think that's really important. And everybody views these ethical conflicts and that in their own way, and some of them look at it very black and white. If it's not a clear ethical violation, then it's not an ethical violation or a conflict. I always look at it a little different. I believe if there's the appearance of a conflict, then I, over the years, have always recused myself. And I've had as many people complain about me recusing myself because I tell them that it's not an actual conflict, but I think it's the perception of a conflict. It particularly happens with me when I have clients that may not have been clients for mine for 5 years, and I'll still recuse myself because I don't want it to look as though I'm giving them any favoritism, even though the actual conflict only occurs if I've made any financial benefit from them over the last 12 months. So everybody looks at it differently. I have colleagues that look at it differently than I do, but you all have to live with yourself at the end of the day, and that's what's the most important thing, and try not to violate anything, particularly those that are actual conflicts. I agree. The reason the council sent the whole issue of the ordinance rewrite back down here was because we felt that it needed some clarification. And without commenting on the particulars, I agree with a lot that was said tonight with regard to it, and it's because I think we need an update. We need to close some gaps, and we need to work on it, and I'm confident with the individuals on this commission that it's going to get done, and it's going to get done well. I really don't have anything else. There's one of the things that may have an impact on areas of our city. There is a proposal circulating for a ballot measure with regard to the short-term rentals, in which the people that are circulating it want the approval of short-term rentals in all residential and VMU neighborhoods in the community, and it's out for signatures. They have to get 10% of the signatures. Part of part of the process is they tell us what they want to do, and then it has to be submitted, and Matt had to write a title and do a summary, which has been given back to them, and now they have a period of time to comment on it. But that could have a dramatic effect on many of our neighborhoods if that were to pass. Other than that, I don't really have anything else that the council, yes?
Quick question. Rhonda retired today?
Yes?
Thank you very much to Rhonda. She has been immeasurably helpful over the years that I and others have done business with her, so big thank you to her.
Yeah.
Who will we call now?
Well, for
You?
the time being, yeah, you can call me. I'm
No, just
unfortunately
kidding.
not a member of staff, so I'm not going to be able to help you much. Call the city manager.
Oh, okay. Okay, Steve.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Call the city manager. And the council is now, we have a certain period of time, I believe 60 days, to either call for a special election or to appoint a city clerk in the interim. The city clerk would have to be appointed again, or be elected again in November. So if we called for a special election, we'd probably do it at the same time of the general election in November. The city has had a combined city clerk and management of our records. Our records manager have been combined with Rhonda, but they really are two different positions. The city currently is interviewing for records management, and then we have a few applications for a city clerk that we're still looking at. So whether or not we're going to combine it or not, whether it's my recommendation to appoint somebody as an interim, or whether we just have a general election and have somebody fill in there until November, that is still something to be decided. But thank you for your comments about Rhonda. She's been a fabulous employee, good city clerk. One of the things is that the city clerk is such an important position in the city because they don't report to the council, they don't report to the city manager, they report to the people, and that's the way it should be. That's the one place you can go to in the city that you can go to with a high degree of faith that that person is going to be independent and utilize their independence against any kind of pressures that the council may put on them or any kind of pressures that the city manager might. So we're going to miss her. Going to really miss her. Anybody else have any questions? I'm here the liaison is normally on this quarter is going to be Mayor Pro Tem Wyrick, so you're welcome to ask him any questions too. I'm the liaison this quarter to the Planning Commission, so I get to go to 2 commission meetings every month rather than 1. But I enjoy it, and seriously, if you have any questions that you want to ask in open session like this, assuming that the council person isn't under some sort of a restriction for answering it, think of those questions, and every agenda has a place for the liaison. Ask them the question. And I can assure you that if I couldn't answer something, I'd get back to you. So never be afraid to ask the council person that's here one time as a commissioner in an open forum to ask a question so that we can answer it for you. Okay?
Thank you, Mayor
Again,
Blatz.
welcome to the new commissioners. Thank you very much for agreeing to serve. I loved what I heard tonight from everybody, so thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Blatz. That concludes our meeting this evening. I, too, want to welcome our new commissioners. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to serving with you. Good night. And with that,
I just want to, I'm sorry, I know everybody's really tired and needs to go home, but back in the background, Stephanie Edmondson's been kind of floating around. She's a new contract planner working for us, and she's helped me out tonight, so I just want to introduce her to all of you. So if you're wondering why there was a strange face, so she'll be here helping us out. She's part of site-specific. They've been, lots of people have come here. You see different faces all the time. So if you have any specific things that, in the interim when Rhonda's gone and, you need some help with, you contact me, Sherry, or Stephanie. I just wanted to explain the phantom person running around. So thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.